Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming to our June edition of the Space Systems Working Group. It's a little bit different this morning. We normally do not have half-day forums, so this is very unusual and very special, and you'll benefit from it greatly. We're at the Chan Auditorium of the University of Alabama in Huntsville. We're very fortunate to have facilities like this in our community, which we take advantage of from time to time to host our meetings. UAH has been a gracious host for many years. We've had quite a number of working group meetings in this facility. We have a very special trip for you this morning. We always thank our host for providing refreshments and facilities. Our special treat is we have the new, I don't know how long that new is going to be. But the president of the University of Alabama Huntsville, Dr. Don Leo, with us this morning. He's joining us. He's almost 18 days into the job. He is the 11th president of UAH. He joined UAH in the 1st of June. He has 30 plus years of experience in higher education. He's formerly the Executive Vice President Provost at Ohio University, and he was for 11 years at the University of Georgia, where he served as the first permanent Dean of Engineering. I want to welcome Dr. Leo up to make a few welcoming remarks to us all. And sir, we're glad to have you this morning, and we're very appreciative of you hosting our meeting. But most of all, we just look forward to meeting you and getting to know you. Would you like to come forward?
Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you, Joe, for that kind introduction. And I really just want to do two things this morning. The first thing is to welcome you and thank you for being here. It's great to see everybody on campus. I also want to thank Joe for all the work that he does with NDIA, and of course all the work that everybody in this room does in defense of our country. So thank you very much for everything that you do every day. As Joe mentioned, I'm pretty new on the job, and one of the things that I mentioned to campus is that I want to do three things in my first 100 days in the job as president. One is I want to listen to what our opportunities and challenges are on campus. I want to learn what makes us distinctive. And I also then want to lead us to some priorities that we'll be talking about across campus in the fall, so more to come. But one thing I have learned in my, was it 18 days? I hadn't counted, but thank you, Joe. My 18 days as president is that partnerships are vitally important. If you know the history of UAH, you'll know that the institution was really founded as a way to support the Arsenal, what became NASA Marshall, and all the other organizations that have grown up in the Huntsville area. And I think this meeting and the presence of this distinguished guest is a testament to the fact that we've continued in that role. And one of my goals as president is to strengthen those partnerships even further, make sure that we're even more engaged in the success of everybody in this room, but especially our guests from the Arsenal and the other organizations in the Huntsville area. And just make sure that we're trusted and a partner for you and your success. Because if you're successful, and the community is successful, and the university is successful. So if there's anything I can do to help you in that regard, please reach out. And Tom Koshet is here as well. He's from our Office of Research, and he's of vital importance to that endeavor as well. So please reach out if we can do anything to help you. I look forward to being able to stay for a little bit and hearing some of the conversation. And again, thank you for being here. Thank you very much for joining us on campus, and I hope you have a great half-day workshop. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Leo. We look forward to your tenure at UAH, and I hope it's long. I know it will be quite long and distinguished.
Hopefully more than 19 days.
Well, how many of you are visitors here for the first time or haven't been here in a while? Please raise your hands. Quite a number. Because this is somewhat unusual for the working group to host a forum on test of logistics. It doesn't, on the surface, you wouldn't ordinarily think that Space and the working group would be hosting such a forum. However, we want to focus on space and defense issues as it relates to contested logistics, and we'll get into that in a moment. But we're in our 42nd year of providing technical leadership, support, and education for the defense and deployed forces of our nation's ballistic missiles, ballistic and cruise missiles. Membership is open. Those of you that raise your hand, membership is open. It doesn't cost you anything. All you need to do is push your contact information. We'll notify you. You will henceforth be a member of the working group. Our purpose is to support, be very proactive, and inform advocacy on space and missile defense programs, to assist in the decision-making process, and to educate the general population and elected representation on space and missile defense. We encourage and facilitate the exchange of information, hence our reason for being here this morning. We support the need for space and for missile defense programs without advocating for specific solutions. We're here in the wonderful Chan Auditorium, the Business School of the University of Alabama, Huntsville. If you wonder why you're here, I hope you all have a nice one of those programs. Those are collectibles. Get autographs on the back page. There's a couple of pages back there. The inside cover, you can take notes. So it's a multi-function document that you can use on into the future. So there's a couple of pages back there to take notes. But this is what's going to happen this morning. We're going to have our special guest, and we'll introduce General Mohan in a moment. But this is what the program looks like. If you haven't referred to your program that you received, did everybody get one? If you haven't, they're in the lobby. There's also a collectible in the lobby that you might want to pick up. You haven't seen one of those. They didn't pick them up. And the most important part of this, I bought these back in 1980 or 1990. And they were an antique then. But I bought them as a kind of a novelty to pass out at the Space and Missile Defense Symposium. By the way, we've got that coming up in August in our 29th year. Here at Huntsville, the largest symposium held on as it relates to space and missile defense. But I bought those back many years ago to pass out. And the most important thing on this collectible is it said "Made in USA." I challenge you to find a pocket protector made in the United States. Yeah, just a little. Sorry. This is our program. We're going to take a break, a networking break around 10:30. And or 10 o'clock, we'll have a 15-minute networking break, and then we'll have a second keynote address by General Mohan. I'll introduce him and followed up by a panel, and we'll wrap it up, and we'll be out of here by noon. That's intentional, because we didn't want to buy any lunch. break food's okay, that stuff, but when you talk about lunch, no. That gets a little, talk about logistics. But, that being said, I want to introduce my good friend this morning. Lieutenant General Chris Mohan. I could say Christopher O. Mohan, but I have to ask what the O is for, and we can't figure that out. But Commanding General of the United States Army Materiel Command. Lieutenant General Chris Mohan assumed the duties as the 22nd Commanding General of the U.S. Army Materiel Command on 20 November 2025. In this role, he leads one of the Army's largest commands, impacting all 50 states and more than 130 countries. Previously serving as the Deputy Commanding General of Army Materiel Command, he managed the day-to-day operations of the Army's logistics enterprise and served as the Senior Commander at Redstone Arsenal. He's held numerous command assignments, including Army Sustainment Command, 21st Theater Sustainment Command, and the 3rd Sustainment Command Expeditionary, including commands in both Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom. He has served in our United States Army as an Army officer for 37 years. How do you feel, sir? Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm welcome to
Hey, it's always good to see so many friends. It's always good to get introduced by Joe. Although he did tell me out in the lobby, hey, look, hey, you're looking pretty good in the eye jacket. You need to change the photo in your bio because it's not a good one. Okay, thanks, Joe. I appreciate that. Hey, so I had the distinct pleasure and honor of introducing the keynote speaker this morning. General Retired Charlie Flynn has served at every level in our Army. He's a career infantry officer, served time in the Ranger Regiment. But I think the most consequential assignment he had was the Commanding General of U.S. Army Pacific, which he held from 21 to 24 when he retired. He is an expert in contested logistics, and I can speak this from the fact that He was beating me over the head and shoulders when he was the USAPAC commander to move more capability into the Pacific. And I'll have the opportunity to talk about that a little bit later, and I'm sure he will as well. And we are now seeing the fruits of his labor as we have a much more resilient network. We have enterprise approaches in the Pacific, and we have footholds that, quite frankly, are driving our potential adversaries crazy. And it all started with General Flynn's vision. And so there is no better officer to talk about contested logistics and to kick this thing off. And on top of that, he's a patriot who believes deeply in the values of our country, who believes deeply in what we do as a defense enterprise to protect and defend our country. And so please join me in a very warm welcome for General Retired Charlie Flynn.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see all of you here. Thank you very much for the invitation, Joe, Chris. Thanks for those introductory remarks. I'm gonna go probably 25 minutes here with some remarks, and then I'll sit and take questions. I know Joe's got a few that are teed up for me, but I also would welcome questions from the audience, and I think that interaction is probably the best way to see what's on your mind, but also provide you some feedback, or at least my perspective on some of these challenges that we're confronted with today. Again, Joe, thanks a lot for the invitation. Great to see many friends, new and old, here this morning, and I look forward to catching up even in the networking session at the break or even after 12 o'clock. So, China and the United States, the most consequential relationship this century, and in fact, I would say it's going to define this century, is the one between the United States and China. And there are a lot of things that are going on right now, and this is just I think a fascinating time to be alive. And I think that the country, our people, our sovereignty, our prosperity, our freedoms, our liberties are all being challenged. And I think that it is important to speak about these matters because of the stakes. So I'm going to make some remarks here. Some of this is a bit controversial, and I would welcome actually your feedback on it, and if that helps by addressing some of the questions when Joe and I grab a seat here, then that would be I think that would be great for just the interaction between the audience and myself. Last night I asked Joe, we were just having a beer going over things, and I asked him to put a map up there. I'm actually not going to refer to the map in the remarks, but when we sit down, I think it is important to talk about it, because a lot of what I'm going to speak about has much to do with the geometry of that geography. One point I want to start with for everyone in here before I get into my remarks is in that area of responsibility right there, and even though Hawaii is generally in the middle of the map and there's a lot of blue there, 6 out of 10 people on this planet live in that part of the planet, in that part of the globe. And by estimates, by 2040-ish, 7 out of 10 people in the world will live in that area of our responsibility. And even though there's a lot of water on that map, there's a lot of humans that live out there. And it's a massive part of the world. And if you have not been out there, for those that have been out there, you'll understand what I'm talking about. But if you haven't been out there, I just want to tell you, it's just, it's something to behold, because it's filled with people, and it is filled with countries, and it's filled with consequences tied to the region, but tied to global security, and of course tied to the United States and China's relationship. Okay, so with that as a lead-in, let me tell you, I'm going to talk about positional advantage and the operational foundation of deterrence by denial. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I want to begin with a basic proposition. The objective in the Indo-Pacific is not war. Our objective out there is no war. But no war does not come from statements, slogans, strategy documents, or simple presence of military forces. No war comes from creating a military problem that an adversary does not believe it can solve. That's deterrence. And in the Indo-Pacific, deterrence will succeed only when the United States and its allies and partners possess the positional, operational, and material advantage necessary to deny aggression from the opening hours of a crisis through the duration of a conflict. That is why I have long advocated for what I call positional advantage. Positional advantage is not simply about where we plan forces or place them. It's about whether those forces are connected, sustained, protected, informed, and capable of producing effects at the time and place of our choosing. It is the military and security framework that binds together the regional architecture. It connects our allies, partners, forces, bases, agreements, intelligence, logistics, fires protection, command and control systems into an operational network. Without that network, we have nothing but locations. We only have platforms. We only have bilateral relationships or exercises or programs of record. But we do not necessarily have combat power. The central question is not whether the United States has forces in the region. The central question is whether those forces can survive, communicate, move, sustain themselves, find the enemy, protect the force, and deliver lethal and non-lethal effects while under persistent attack. This is a very, very different standard, and it is the standard that matters, and the only standard that matters. The Indo-Pacific is a logistics theater. For far too long, the United States has viewed the Indo-Pacific primarily through platforms and service preferences. We talk about ships, aircraft, missiles, ranges, magazines, sensors, and exquisite technologies. And while all of those matter, in the Indo-Pacific, fundamentally, it's a logistics theater that needs that robust backbone. It is a theater defined by distance, time, scale, geography, infrastructure, limitations, political access, contested movement, and enormous consumption rates of combat power. The distances alone should force us to think differently. This is not Europe, it's not the Middle East. There is no continuous road and rail network connecting the force. There's no expectation that large, secure rear areas are going to remain untouched. There's no guarantee that a major port, airfield, fuel facility, headquarters, satellite link, or logistics nodes will remain available simply because it was available at the beginning of the conflict. Every node is going to be observed. Every signature is going to be analyzed. Every concentration of forces is going to be targeted. Every movement will be contested, and every delay is going to matter. Yet we continue to speak about sustainment as if it was a supporting function that will somehow arrive after the operational concept has been developed, and this is wrong. That thinking must end. Sustainment is not a supporting concept. Sustainment is an operational concept. It is not something that follows maneuver, it enables maneuver. It determines the duration, tempo, reach, and the endurance of the joint force. And in many cases, sustainment will determine whether a commander has meaningful options at all. We must stop building operational concepts that assume logistics will simply appear. Fuel does not appear, ammo doesn't appear, repair parts don't appear, air defense interceptors just don't appear. Water, medical support, replacement crews, batteries, generators, communications equipment, maintenance capability, they just don't show up. They must be positioned. They must be moved. They have to be distributed. They have to be protected. We have to replenish them. And this is all going to happen while it's contested. And contested logistics is not primarily a transportation problem. It's an integrated warfighting problem. It involves access, authorities, industrial capacity, pre-positioning, post-station support, commercial shipping, military sealift, air movement, inland distribution, data protection, deception, engineering, maintenance, contracting, and command and control. All of it has to come together. This is why positional advantage is so important. Position creates options, access, reduces time and distance, complicates the adversary's targeting, allows joint forces to distribute and then converge. Position allows logistics to become more resilient because the force is not dependent on one port, one airfield, one headquarters, or one fuel site. The purpose of positional advantage is not to create a larger target set. It is to create a network that is too distributed, too connected, too resilient, and too operationally useful for an adversary to disable at an acceptable cost. Protection is not optional. This is another uncomfortable truth. We cannot build a distributed force and then leave it exposed. We cannot establish logistics nodes across the theater and assume distance will protect them. We cannot place command posts, fuel, ammo, sensors, launchers, aircraft ships, or personnel forward without holding a serious protection architecture around it. Protection is not a secondary consideration, it's a requirement for positional advantage. And the two most immediate protection challenges are integrated air and missile defense and counter-unmanned aircraft systems. The threat is no longer limited to a handful of ballistic missiles or high-end cruise missiles. The threat includes ballistic, cruise missiles, hypersonic systems, one-way attack drones, surveillance drones, loitering munitions, electronic attack, cyber intrusion, sabotage, special operations, and coordinated and highly coordinated information operations. The adversary will not attack one layer at a time. It will attempt to overwhelm the entire system. It will use inexpensive systems to force us to expend expensive interceptors. It will use drones to reveal the location of radars and command posts. It will use electronic attack and warfare to disrupt communications and targeting. It will attack logistics systems because it understands that destroying fuel, ammo, maintenance can be operationally decisive, more operationally decisive than destroying a simple platform. This is why IMAD and counter-UAS cannot be treated as narrow technical communities. They're central to joint operations, to sustainment, to deterrence, and they are central to maintaining positional advantage. We must think about protection as a layered and integrated system, and that means active defense, passive defense, dispersion, mobility, hardening, camouflage, deception, signature management, rapid repair, redundant communications, cybersecurity, electronic protection, and the ability to reconstitute after attack at point of need. No single interceptor, radar, jammer, directed energy system, or command system is going to solve that problem. The solution is a layered architecture that combines sensors, shooters, electronic warfare, directed energy, kinetic systems, passive measures, and disciplined operational approaches. We should name and assess these systems. We should test Patriot, STAD, NASAMS, indirect protection capabilities, directed energy systems, electronic warfare tools, counter-UAS technologies, emerging sensors, and command and control platforms. But we should not allow ourselves to become trapped in a debate over which a single system is best. This is the wrong question. The right question is what combination of capabilities that one platform, one company, one service, or one program of record, or even one technology can solve an integrated operational problem. It can't. Programs of record should not be protected from reality. They should be challenged by reality. If a program works, scale it. If a material solution is already producing results, insert it into exercise and operational formations. If it performs better than the existing approach, we should not wait years for the bureaucracy to catch up. And if a program does not perform under realistic conditions, we should have the institutional courage to change it, replace it, or end it. The battlefield does not care how long a program of record existed. The enemy does not care how much we have invested. And the American taxpayer should not be asked to continue funding systems simply because the acquisition process has made them difficult to stop. Command and control is the connective tissue of all of this. Positional advantage cannot exist without command and control. C2 is the connective tissue that turns a collection of forces into a fighting formation and a fighting network. But we must be clear about command and control and what it means in this theater, and it is not simply headquarters or command posts filled with screens. It's not a single cop. It's not an assumption of constant, reliable, high bandwidth communications. Command and control in the Indo-Pacific must be distributed, mobile, survival, interoperable, capable of operating through massive disruptions. Assumed communications is going to be degraded, satellite links are going to be attacked, data is going to be manipulated, headquarters are going to be targeted, assume that units will periodically be isolated. That means commanders and formations must be able to operate with less. They must understand the intent, possess authorities, and be able to communicate quickly. They have to have alternative pathways. They must rehearse integrated operations. They must be capable of continuing to fight when the digital architecture does not continue on and is not designed to. Technology can improve decision making. Artificial intelligence can help commanders process information. Data platforms can connect sensors, shooters, logistics, intelligence, and operations. But data volume is not decision advantage. More information does not automatically create better decisions. Decision advantage comes from obtaining the right information, placing it in context, protecting it from manipulation, sharing it with the correct decision makers, and then acting before your adversary does. The goal is not simply to see more. The goal is to see, sense, track, identify, characterize, discriminate, decide, act, and assess faster than your adversary can. This applies to lethal targeting, non-lethal targeting, logistics, information, and force protection. It applies to the political and information dimensions of competition. C2 must also be interoperable with our allies and partners. We cannot claim to have a regional security network where our systems cannot communicate and our data can't be shared, and our authorities limit us to do that. Interoperability is not achieved because senior leaders attend a conference or because forces participate in an exercise. Interoperability means we plan together, communicate together, coordinate our protection, coordinate our sustainment, and we do that under operational pressure. It requires technical solutions, policy decisions, disclosure authorities early, classification reform, and really at the end of the day it requires trust, and I would say repeated rehearsals of the force. Collection, targeting, and information advantage. This is tied into sustainment. The next element of positional advantage is collection. A force that cannot see cannot fight. A force that cannot understand what it sees can't make decisions. And a force that cannot converge and understand its actions does not possess an advantage. The Indo-Pacific will be one of the most observed battlefields in history. Space systems, airborne sensors, maritime system, terrestrial sensors, open source intelligence, acoustic systems, electronic intelligence, and human reporting are going to provide massive volumes of data. But the process of data does not guarantee understanding. We need a collection architecture that's persistent, layered, and shared. The architecture must support both lethal and non-lethal targeting, and it has to identify threats. It has to help commanders distinguish deception from preparation. It has to enable indications and warnings, support long-range fires, and protect logistics. This is where electronic warfare, space, counterspace, cyber, and information advantage must be fully integrated into our operational approach. They are part of the fight. Space enables communications, positioning, timing, weather, warning, intelligence, and targeting. Counterspace capabilities threaten the systems on which modern militaries increasingly depend. Cyber operations can disrupt networks, logistics, command control systems, and our infrastructure. These capabilities have to be integrated into planning from the beginning. The Joint Force must be able to conduct this lethal and non-lethal targeting at the edge. At times, the best way to defeat an enemy system may be a missile. At other times, it may be an electronic attack. It could be cyber, deception, information exposure, disruption of their logistics networks, and it may be the positioning of forces that changes the adversary's risk calculation without firing a shot. The commander should have options, and the architecture has to be designed to produce those. Regional security operations and regional security architecture is necessary for this theory, but only if the network functions operationally. It has to be measured by what the participants can do together. We need to assess the right locations, right forces, intelligence, nodes, ports, runways, coordinate our fires, move casualties, sustain communications, and these nodes have to be able to operate or at least recover even under attack. Those are the real measures of the security network. The Indo-Pacific has the potential to become the most powerful land power network in the world. The region contains many of the world's largest armies. I'll talk about that maybe at the chat. It contains strategically located allies and partners. It has enormous opportunities for critical infrastructure, ports, airfields, training areas, logistics facilities, and industrial capacity. But we have to connect it. And it has to be integrated through sustainment, C2, and protection. This is how positional advantage binds this security architecture together. This approach should extend from the continental United States across Alaska and Hawaii through the first and second island chains, Republic of Korea, Philippines, Australia, and other willing partners. And as a reminder, America's Day starts in Guam. The United States homeland extends all the way out to the second island chain. It should connect all of the training and all of the exercise together and has to be active every day. Major exercises, not just during a crisis. Not only when senior leaders visit, it has to be on every day. Industry has to be part of this. This is part of a campaign. Industry has an indispensable role, but industry must understand the operational problem first. The services and combatant commands must do a better job of explaining the problem. Too often requirements are fragmented. One community asks for a sensor, another asks for communication systems, an interceptor, logistics platform, software. The result can be a series of disconnected solutions optimized for individual requirements, but not integrated into an operational architecture. We need industry to help solve the network problem, has to connect these sensors and shooters, sustainment, critical nodes, forward edge nodes. It's got to reduce signatures. We've got to operate through electronic attack, and it has to be able to repair after infrastructure is damaged. How do we create affordable layers of defense so we are not constantly spending millions of dollars to defeat threats costing us thousands? We have to scale our production, repair systems forward, and we have to move from successful demonstration to actual fielding during exercises. Industry should be rewarded for delivering operational outcomes, not just technical performance. A system that performs well in a controlled demonstration but cannot be maintained, integrated, transported, powered, or secured, and or used by a formation under battlefield conditions is not an operational solution. Every experiment should be tied to a problem, and every exercise should be an opportunity to test that material solution. We are dealing with threats that adapt in weeks and months. We can't take years. Our institutions have to overcome these things much faster. The Army must be honest about its role. Let me say a word or two about the Army. I'm not here to defend the Army. I'm here to defend deterrence. And deterrence in the Indo-Pacific requires the Army to understand what it must provide to the Joint Force. The Army must provide command and control, sustainment, integrated air and missile defense, counter-UAS, long-range fires, intelligence collection, engineering, communications, cyber and electronic warfare, medical capability, mobility, protection, and forces capable of operating from the land to affect the air, maritime, space, and cyber domains. The Army cannot define its relevance there by simply moving traditional formations into the Pacific and calling that transformation. Nor can it define transformation through technology labels, organizational slogans, or a series of disconnected initiatives. The Army must transform to fight and win in a battlefield defined by converging observation, range, speed, precision, signature management, and lethality. That transformation begins with doctrine, organizational changes, command relationships, training, planning, force structure, and authorities. The first and most important decision does not always cost money. It's cultural, it's doctrinal, it's organizational, it's decisions about how we fight, it's command, it's sustain, it's distribute, We have to protect, we have to integrate into the joint force, and we have to operate with our allies and partners. These are senior leader responsibilities. These are not responsibilities for company commanders and battalion commanders and brigade commanders. This is what the senior leaders of the Army have to focus on. This is not something we should expect tactical formations to solve. Headquarters have to drive change. More importantly, senior commanders must rehearse their plans. They must know where they're going to receive equipment, how it's going to be sustained, how to communicate. They must know what happens when ports, airfields, headquarters, and logistics nodes are attacked. Readiness must be measured against the mission, and against the plan, and against the threat, and against the conditions under which the forces are going to actually fight. We must create doubt in the adversary's mind. Ultimately, deterrence is a contest of perception. The adversary must believe that aggression will fail. They must believe the United States and its allies and partners can absorb the opening attack, continue operating, deny the objective, impose costs, and sustain the fight. It must believe that our political will is matched by operational capability. It must believe that that network that I talked about earlier is real. That our positions are defendable, our logistics is resilient, our command and control systems are going to continue to function, and our forces can find and strike critical targets at will. That our air and missile defense forces can protect key nodes, our allies and partners will act, and that there is no rapid, low-cost path to victory. We do not need to eliminate every adversary option. We need to make every option uncertain, costly, and increasingly likely that it will fail. That is the value of positional advantage. It creates multiple dilemmas. It denies the adversary a single decisive target. It allows our forces to remain dispersed and then able to converge. It supports the joint force from the land and the systems that sustain this campaign, and it improves warning, targeting options, reassures our allies that we are operating in the region and that this is an important difference that we make. Forward presence can't be episodic. Positional advantage is persistent, presence can be symbolic, and positional advantage is fully operational. Positional advantage is measured by whether the joint force and its partners can create effects tomorrow after the adversary has attacked our network. A practical standard that I'll talk about. So let me offer a practical standard for you. Any proposed capability, posture decision, exercise agreement, program of record, or investment should be tested against 4 questions. Does it improve command and control? Does it improve sustainment? Does it improve our ability to collect and target? And does it improve our protection? Notice I didn't say fires. Notice I didn't say maritime domain, air domain, land domain, cyber domain, space domain. Those are not the questions. It is about command and control, protection, sustainment, and collection. If you move anything in the Pacific, if you move anything, fires and maneuver forces, without those 4 foundational capabilities, you are wasting your time. It won't be able to operate out there unless you have those 4 fundamentals in first. Those cannot be afterthoughts. They can't be specialized communities operating at the edge of some worthless concept. They have to be central ideas, because a force that cannot sustain and protect its logistics cannot generate combat power. A force that cannot sustain itself can't maneuver, can't converge, can't target, and it can't go after the enemy's objectives. In conclusion, I think that we are at a consequential moment. As I talked about earlier, the United States still possesses extraordinary advantages. We have a highly capable force. And anyone that questions the reach and lethality of the U.S. military, they do so at their own peril. They do so at their own peril. However, we still need advanced technology. We need a powerful economy. We need deep operational experience. We need a global network of allies and partners. And an unmatched ability to adapt when we are honest about the problems that we do have. Operational advantage must be built. It must be positioned. It's got to be sustained, protected, and rehearsed. And we have to demonstrate it. And we should not wait for a crisis to expose these gaps. We should expose them now and challenge our assumptions, challenge our structures, challenge our concepts, and our exercises. This is not going to be easy. Future fight will not be won by any one service. or any slogan. It will not be won by the program of the strongest constituency. It will not be won by a headquarters with a large common operating picture. It will be won by a force that can see, decide, move, sustain, protect, strike, adapt, and continue operating under pressure. Our goal remains no war out there, but achieving no war requires more than hope. It requires a credible ability to deny aggression. Credibility begins with positional advantage, a network of allies and partners, sustained through logistics and resilient logistics, improved by persistent collection, protected by layered air and missile defense, and capable of producing lethal and non-lethal effects across every domain. That's how we bind the regional architecture together. It's how we create doubt in the mind of the adversary, and this is how we deter by denial, and it's also how we preserve the peace. So thank you very much. I look forward to your questions, and again, thank you, Joe, for having me here today.
Get your water. Could you hit?
I've got one.
You got one right there?
Right there, Chris. Yeah.
Thanks very much. I'm on
Appreciate it.
How's everybody doing? All right. Good. Thank you, sir. That was. I've got to soak that up. Let me turn this back to the point here. And I'm going to open it up.
And you have microphones on your
Yeah.
desk there.
Good catch. Hello. Everybody here okay?
Yeah.
I read a lot of things that reading of late, that interviews, your papers, and we are so honored to have you with us. First, thank you for coming. But you repeated that the thing that I want to get hit from the discussion that we had tonight with that is your foundational principle, and I want to get into that. You've repeatedly emphasized that logistics is a linchpin in the Indo-Pacific theater. You characterize it as a linchpin, where distance and geopolitical dynamics make sustainment a decisive factor in joint and allied operations. You describe the Indo-Pacific as a joint theater requiring joint solutions, with the Army as the linchpin force that enables and sustains partners. Would you elaborate and describe what you mean by the Army as the linchpin force?
So I asked Joe to put this map up here because, and to some of the commentary there. So, you know, the bias runs deep, and I know my good friend Rick Mercado is here. But this theater, right, is often it's often referred to as an air and maritime theater. And my counter to that is it's not an air and maritime theater. It's actually a joint theater. So that's like, it has joint problems, and only the joint force is going to solve those joint problems. And the Army and land power is an integral part of the solution to the problems that we have out here. I also talk about the Army and land power, and the reason I use land power is because the Army, the U.S. Army, for those that are not aware, a third of the Army is assigned to U.S. Army Pacific. It has reserve commands under it, but maybe more importantly is the makeup of this theater. And I'm going to run through a couple of statistics here that actually, truth be told, probably many of you don't realize this. Because I know that the American public doesn't, because I know that when I talk to staffers, congressmen, senators, they also don't realize it. The Philippine military, 70% of the Philippine military is its army. It has more divisions than the U.S. Army. Okay? It's 7,500 islands. Indonesia. The Indonesian military is 75% army. It's got 17,500 islands. Vietnam, 80%. Taiwan, 80%. Japan, 65%. India, 80% of its military is its army. I could go on. The point I'm making the point I'm making is there is a natural connection between the land power network that is actually the security architecture of what this theater is often referred to as an air and maritime theater. It's not. It's a joint theater, and the land forces and the land power network, which is the U.S. Army, the Marine Corps, Special Operations, and then the massive armies that sit inside this region. And you get a whole different sense of security in these countries when you operate out in the interior, okay? That's different than a FONOP at sea, or a bomber task force flyover, or a pairing in the air domain, or out in the maritime domain. Again, I'm not saying that we need a smaller Navy or a smaller Air Force. In fact, just the contrary. And the reason is that the Navy, the U.S. Navy, and the U.S. Air Force keep the global commons open. That is something that land power can't do. Okay? So commerce moves largely secure because the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Air Force keep those global commons open. Okay? So that's an important element of this. But what I am saying is this is not an air and maritime theater. This is a joint theater with joint problems that's only going to be solved by the joint force. And the U.S. Army, through its history, has a deep connection to these countries. Deep connection. If you look at the Philippine military, it looks just like the U.S. Army. If you look at the Japanese military, it looks just like the U.S. Army. If you look at the Korean military, it looks just like the U.S. Army. And there are a host of other countries like it. Why? Because we had such a large presence, really, from the Spanish-American War. So I'm kind of expanding on the question you asked me, but logistics plays a central role. As I mentioned in there, if you don't have positional advantage through distributed logistics, you're going to have a problem. I'll tell stories while I'm at it. We had 7 vessels afloat out there, okay, in our APS afloat stocks. That was costing the Army more than $2 billion in our program, okay? Now, what weapon systems have the Chinese built? They built an A2AD network, and they have hypersonics, and they have reach, okay, and they have a deep magazine. With Chris's help and many other people's help, I was like, hey, why don't we take the equipment off of these vessels? Sea Lift Command needs them for recap. You got to bring them all the way back to the East Coast to do any of the maintenance on either the vessels or the equipment we have. 2 of them were loaded with ammunition. 5 of them were loaded with equipment. I'm like, hey, this is what we need to do. Like, let's get the equipment off these vessels, get them back for recap, get the equipment into these locations where we operate, instead of dragging the equipment across the Pacific into these locations. Now we have forward stops. Now we have additive manufacturing. Now we have contractual agreements. Now we have access. And basically, we got $2.5 million back, $1 billion back in the pump. I'll use another one. It cost us, Ed would remember this, it would cost us, we were sending our brigades from Alaska and Hawaii to Louisiana for training, okay, at the cost of $60 million. $50 million was transportation. $10 million was training. Now think about it. And by the way, you were separated from your equipment for
a month.
Well, it could be 3 months.
Yeah, right.
A month to get there, a month on the ground, a month to get back. Okay, so I'm like, we need to be training in the theater. We had a training center in Europe for years. We've had 2 in the continental United States. I'm like, the enemy is not that way. It's that way. Like, why are we going that way? By the way, Louisiana doesn't look anything like Southeast Asia, other than the heat. Okay, but it doesn't look like that. It's not the jungles in Luzon. So the point I'm making is we have to train in the theater. We have to remain in the theater. we have to operate in the conditions and in the geography that we are most likely to operate in the theater. Same thing with Alaska. Coming out of the Middle East, we had desert-colored equipment up there. We had no capability to operate high altitude, extreme cold weather, mountainous conditions. You want to see something function in 40 degree below zero, then you can, I tell you what, bring industry out there and you can see whether it works there. You need to put stuff in 105 degree temperature with 130% humidity in the jungle and see if it works. Or put it on a vessel, a watercraft moving an inland waterway and then coming out and having to go to another island, and you'll find out whether that equipment, through salt corrosion and heat and humidity, whether it works or not. So if you're doing a test in Fort Bliss or White Sands Missile Range or Nellis, that doesn't look anything like what's going on out there. And so my point was, every experiment out there had to have an exercise, and every exercise needed to have an experiment, because then we could really find out. Because the best R&D feedback you're going to get is from a soldier that's actually using it. And you're not going to get the same feedback at Fort Carson, Colorado, or Fort Knox, Fort Riley, or Fort Hood. You're going to get it when you're in Banjarmasin in Indonesia, on the island of Sumatra. That's when you're going to find out whether that thing actually functions or not. So having those stores forward actually gave us an opportunity to rehearse drawing the equipment, deploying our personnel into these logistics sites, and then moving equipment out into the interior. And by the way, the Joint Force benefits from it. It's like Aguila Harbor in the Philippines right now. Because that's now a Joint Theater Distribution Center, but the Army got that thing started with its seed corn. But now it's for the Joint Force. And these are the interdependencies that the Joint Force has from the Army. I told this to Honorable Colby the other day. The Army is the only service that has a 2-star commander in the theater that does sustainment. Nobody else has a commander wearing 2 stars on his shoulders with a staff and with reach to the enterprise of the Joint Force or the Army in the theater. So we're in a natural position to be able to do this and do it well, because we have capacity to do it. And by the way, the bulk of the Guard and Reserve are coming out of the Army. I could go on.
Let's continue that in our speaking. You stress that logistics is not a support function,
That's right.
as it is often considered, but a core warfighting capability. Further, that it must be used as central to deterrence and must be prepared for, rehearsed, and integrated into all operational planning. Without logistics as a deterrent, readiness is compromised. Please amplify what you mean, and you touched on that. Amplify what you mean by logistics as a core warfighting function, and thereby a deterrent.
Yeah, I'll illustrate this through a story that Ed was involved in, Chris was involved in, and your headquarters was involved in. So Ed and I were out in the Pacific. I was at DCG at USOPAC, and if you recall, remember the Little Rocket Band period?
Yeah.
Okay. That, the end result of that was another THAAD system was permanently stationed there, but that's really not the story. The story is this, that General Perna and this headquarters here at AMC, we moved 90 days of ammunition to Japan and Korea and other logistics in probably 60 days. And all of that was happening while this, rhetoric and, missiles were being shot, new administration, because this was in the first Trump, just in the early days of it. And the reason I'm telling you this, and I can't go into any other detail, but that entire situation simmered down when all that sustainment went and was positioned. So, to my remarks, like, it may not be that you have to fire a shot. In fact, that's the way you want it to be. You want to be able to position things and then say, listen, we have capability, we have posture, we are messaging you, and we're demonstrating the political and military will to actually act. Okay, so those four things, in my view, are really what integrated deterrence stands for. Capability plus posture plus messaging plus will. And the will is political will and military will. Now, military will, you could say it like capability, but if you have posture and you put capabilities down and then you message, you take another step, we're going to do something against you, then in my remarks, any adversary that questions the lethality and reach of the U.S. military, they do so at their own peril. I mean, the U.S. military is it has extraordinary capabilities. Do we have problems? Of course we do. Do we need manufacturing back? You're damn right we do. I was talking about this with Chris yesterday. For those that have studied China, they went after 10 sectors. Pharmacy, steel, shipbuilding, critical minerals, processing specifically. I could go on. And I'll say this. I actually, somebody asked me the other day what keeps me up at night. When I was in uniform, it was something different. Now that I'm out of uniform, what keeps me up at night is our inability to manufacture, to build things fast enough. Because we don't own our supply chains. End to end. 90% of the processing for concentrate of iron ore, pick a rare earth element or a critical mineral, of which there's now 60, we don't process 90% of that. So Trump takes office, February, 10% tariff. What do? Flood the zone. They countered with putting a chokehold on critical minerals. Same thing in April. And the point I'm making here is, if we can't make batteries, and we can't make magnets, and we can't make semiconductors, because we don't own end-to-end supply chain, we've got a huge problem. And that's what keeps me up at night. And that is tied directly to logistics, because if you think of a semiconductor as your brain, and a battery as your heart, and a magnet as your spine, you can't live without those three. And if you think about that combination of our inability to produce those in this country, then that should keep you up at night. And by the way, this is not going to be built in one administration. We're not going to regain control of manufacturing and raw materials and the processing of those raw materials in a 4-year political cycle. It's going to take years. Why? Because we walked away from it when China went into the WTO in 2001, gave them favored trade nation status, and we said, everybody's boat's going to rise. No, they're not. They're communists. And I'm not against the Chinese people, but I am against the Communist Chinese Party. I'm not talking about the Chinese people. I'm not talking about China and the people of China. I'm talking about the Communist Chinese Party, the CCP, and the military arm that they have created.
You and I, thank you so much for that. I don't know if you're getting as much out of this as I am.
Yes.
I'll tell you what. You and I spoke last night about the similarities, and I'm sure a historian. We talked about the similarities of World War II and our war with China, with Japan. Comparing a war with China to our war with Japan in World War II, distance and dispersion remain central challenges. But modern technology and A2AD threats amplify risks. Forward positioning of stocks are critical. Historical island hopping strategies offer flexibility and redundancy. Multi-domain threats, cyberspace, and long-range fires require integrating across all services and allied partners. And sustainment is vital. To your point, sustainment, so you can't just put them out there. You've got to defend them, you've got to sustain them.
Yeah.
Whereas failure to maintain logistics could halt operations like underestimating supply in World War II forced strategic adjustments. Could you comment on how the Indo-Pacific's contested logistic environment mirrors the World War II Pacific theater in its complexity and criticality, but how modern threats and technological dependencies make sustainment even more challenging today in a potential war with China?
Well, I'm not sure it's more challenging today, but I guess I'll color this with a quote up front. Admiral Ernest King, who was I think at the time he was the acting CNO, he goes, I don't know what MacArthur's talking about with all this logistics, but I want some of it. And I guess the point that I'm making here is that, this is, again, back to our history out there, which, I know we just had D-Day and, everybody, the European continent is a land continent, land-dominant continent with armies, and our history is there, but the Army's history in the Pacific is extraordinary. So, 22 divisions, 6 field armies. 6 field armies. It was the third largest assembly of an army that we ever created. It was massive. And if you've been to places like, I've been to a little island down here called New Caledonia. It's a French, it's the French version of Guam territory, okay? We put 1.5 million soldiers through there in 90 days. I mean, the logistics of this is just on its way up into the Solomon Islands and into the Philippines. The amount of capability that the U.S. Army projected into the Second World War in the Pacific was it's extraordinary what we put in place. And to see some of these locations, it's amazing. I'll give you one other story. I've been to the island of Corregidor. Has anybody ever been to the island of Corregidor? Okay, so, and I tell this story because it's kind of like where are we in the movie of China's rise? Okay, I went back out to the Pacific in 2014 after. If you think about it, from 2001 to 2014, it was, I knew where Kandahar, Kabul, Baghdad, Helmand province was, right? Because we were in the Middle East. 2014, I find myself, General Odierno called me. I told you this story last week. He called me and said, hey, you're going to take command of the 25th, good luck. And my brother was the director of DIA at the time, and he called me and he said, Charlie, you should come up here. I'll give you 2 days immersed with the analysts from China. I went up there for 2 days, and I was leaving to drive back to Fort Bragg. I got stuck in traffic, like most people do in Springfield, and after 2 days, I sat there and I said, holy shit, I haven't been watching China for 14 years, and I think I'm actually reflective of the country. I'm reflective of the country. So it dawned on me in a traffic jam, and I was taking command in about a month. This is in April of 2014. This is March, actually. I took command in April. And it dawned on me that I hadn't been paying attention to what China was doing for 14 years. And so that was a call to action for me intellectually to just study what they were doing. Didn't realize at the time that I was going to be the 25th commander, the deputy of USAPAC, the Army G3, and then back out as the commander of U.S. Army Pacific. So effectively for the next decade plus, I woke up every day and pointed that way because that's where our adversaries were, primarily China, North Korea, and Russia. And I tell that story because, again, I think I'm reflective of the country. We were a little bit asleep at what was happening. And then I find myself back out there in 2021, and that's 6-7 years later, and you look at the arsenal that they created and the threat and their, I'll say, irresponsible behavior, and I define what they're doing out there as incremental. They've been at it for a couple of decades. It's insidious because they're at the core of them, they're just corrupt, and I mean the Communist Chinese Party. I can tell stories about this. And then the last I is irresponsible. Their behavior out there is threatening, and they demonstrate it every day by ramming boats, flying across center lines, and just threatening things. So any country that is on an incremental, insidious, and irresponsible march, and oh, by the way, in 2015, a year after I went back out there the second time, that's actually when their modernization caught up with their capability advances, their technologies, their rockets. They really started accelerating space and cyber and nuke, and then their land systems, okay? And then they took a page out of our playbook. They built training centers, big training centers. And these training centers were where they started taking their capabilities and their formations and testing all these things out. And now I'm just going to advance forward to, my time as a 4-star. The exercises that they were doing, they were beginning to really, really scale. To the point where we started, and rightfully so, Admiral Aquilino, Admiral Paparo to this day, well, 4-star, we just started referring to them as they were rehearsing, because that's what they were doing. Conversely, we were not doing that, and we weren't referring to that because it was irritating to our allies and partners. And we need to get over the political sensitivity and say, no, we are rehearsing too. Like, we are moving equipment, we are moving people, we are emplacing tactical assembly areas, we are going to firing positions, we are establishing a joint fires network, we are establishing a joint theater logistics distribution network. We are doing this with our allies and partners. And again, back to the beginning of the movie here, I believe the natural connection in the region and the security architecture of this region is actually defined by land power. Now, I know the Navy centrists and the air guys will push back on that, but the fact of the matter is this. You want to find out what's going on with the security situation in these countries, get out into the interior. See inside of these countries and see what's going on down to the community grassroots level, because that's a reflection of what's happening sometimes in their capital or not in their capital. And they will tell you whether they want the American presence there and in what size, and what makeup, and how important it is. And so if somebody, I'm going to stay on message. If somebody told me, and here's some things that have been advanced out there because of our work. If somebody told me in 2021 that the Japanese were going to fire a Type 88 land-based anti-ship missile from the Philippines, mind you, remember the history here now, okay? The Japanese flattened the Philippines, okay? They now have formal agreements with the Philippines, and they're deploying their most advanced land-based anti-ship missiles into the Philippines and doing a live fire. Now, they did that because we led the way. The U.S. led the way by having the Typhoon system down there. We did Patriot live fires. We brought HIMARS in there, etc., etc. By the way, the Japanese also just exposed their first land-based Type 12 hypersonic cruise missiles inside of Japan. The Philippines are buying BrahMos anti-ship missiles from India. The Philippines went from 4 EDCA sites to 9 EDCA sites, and even though Aguila Harbor is not an EDCA site, it's basically part of the Luzon economic zone that this administration has just started up because they saw what was happening with Aguila and Clark nearby. And again, the Philippine political leadership sees the threat, and they're responding to the threat because of the way that China is behaving. I mentioned information operations. I just have to talk about this because it's really a challenge for us. So here's a play out of their playbook, and they're doing it in this country too, because you see it in open source reporting. They buy land right next to a military installation or critical infrastructure. Okay, they're buying land. Now I'll stay country agnostic here. But here's what happens: they buy land. They own a telecommunications company. They put towers up on that land. You can guess what those towers are doing. Then they own 7 members of a media company on the board. And then that media company opens up bot farms, and then they grab information and they spew disinformation and misinformation about what the United States is doing, what the West is doing, etc., etc. And you're in a information, cyber, and space war every single day out there. It is contact, full contact. And they don't play. They are very good, very skilled, and this is their game. And they do it inside this country, and they're doing it all over that region. Because their aim is regional hegemony, because they have global aspirations. And don't think for a minute that they're not continuing to try. I know there's a ton of happy talk going on, and that's good. If you're not talking, you're fighting. So I'm excited that the administration is talking, because we weren't talking, and that's not a good place to be. So, and I'm telling you these stories because back to the very early comments that I made, this century is going to be defined by the relationship between the United States and China. Just like the last century was defined by the relationship between the United States and Europe. This century is going to be defined by ours and I would say Asia. I'm on a roll, so I don't know what time it is.
I'll let you go.
For those of you that served out there, I'll just I said deliberately in here, because I say it deliberately to remind people that America's day starts in Guam, the second island chain. Okay? Those are American citizens, American nationals. We have an obligation to protect the Northern Marianas, the Marshall Islands, Guam, Palau. I mean, our day goes on. And by the way, if you take a direct flight from Honolulu to DC, it's about 10 hours. If you take a direct flight from Honolulu to Guam, it's about 10 hours. You're not even in the region yet. You're in the second island chain. That's how big this place is, okay? It's massive. And so it's really important that people understand the challenge that the U.S. military has, because China has 3 things that we do not have. They have magazine depth, because they got a lot of weapons. They have mass, because they have a lot of ships, planes, and they got a second largest army in the world after India. And then they have, they're operating on interior lines. Military parlance, they're 100 miles from their objective, okay? We have none of those. So how do we overcome that? And my theory of victory is we have to gain positional advantage. And we have to do that through permanent forces, Korea, Japan, probably some in Australia, definitely some in Guam. Permanency, dynamic deployment, and rotational deployment. We have to throw all 3 combinations. We have to be a boxer that is really good with a hook, a jab, and a knockout punch, okay? So we have to be able to do all those as the U.S. military. And the challenge in this theater is that if you don't have your anchors of your allies and partners, you're at a loss. You need those access agreements. You need those partners to enable what has to go on. And so the interoperability between our forces and their forces creates conditions for us to have posture, capability to message what we're doing out there, and then demonstrate the political and military will that we are a Pacific nation. Homeland starts in the second island chain, and our day begins in Guam, and that the consequences of our relationship with Asia and with China are going to determine the outcomes of this century. And that's why hard power, and for too many years, I'll be critical of the Army, for too many years, the only hard power that was really being demonstrated out there was by
the US Navy and the US Air Force. We had hard power capability, but we didn't necessarily put it out there. Now, I can make excuses to say we're tied up like a knot in the Middle East, I get it. But the fact of the matter is, bless his soul, he's passed, but General Ordino actually is the Chief of Staff of the Army. He moved the 4-star build from Europe to the Pacific. That's actually how that command went back to a 4-star, and it made a huge difference. Huge difference. And there were other parts of it, forces that were assigned, that were going to the Middle East, that were taking off our rotations to the Middle East, so the net gain in the Pacific was greater command and control and greater access to forces. But I would say that we paused a little bit, and we shouldn't have. But I am excited about what we've been doing out there for the last 5 years, and I think that it's had a massive impact. And I think we in the Army ought to give ourselves more credit, talk more widely about the successes of it, and stay on the fact that the land power network in the Indo-Pacific is actually the security architecture that binds that region together. Why? Because it's the central institution in these countries that protects its borders, defends its territorial integrity, and really protects its national sovereignty. They turn to their army for everything. Indonesia, again, 75% of its military is its army. And they're looking to us for multi-domain operations. They want to learn about our multi-domain task forces. They want to know how we sense. They want to know how we strike. They want to know how we do sustainment. They want to come to our training centers. This has a massive impact. They're coming to our schools. I was telling a story earlier today. I was talking to a very critical commander in Taiwan recently. He went to the Citadel. 65% of all the international military education seats in the Department of War are Army schools. It's a massive influence on this region when we send these leaders from these countries back to our officer courses, non-commissioned officer courses, and warrant courses. Those seats are critical. Nobody even talks about it. The influence that the U.S. military, and I would say the U.S. Army has in this region through those schools is extraordinary. You get no credit for it. It's a State Department program that the Department of War supports. It's extraordinary.
Building on that comment, those comments, and by the way, I hope you're enjoying this as much as I am, folks. A potential war with China would require sustaining forces over 6,500 miles from the U.S. West Coast to the Western Pacific, with intra-theater distribution across key points like Japan, Korea, Guam, and Northern Australia. Modern logistics must integrate joint and allied capabilities, including updated Army watercraft and prepositioned stocks to counter Chinese anti-access area denial threats. Unlike World War II, contemporary operation must also account for cyber and space disruptions, which could paralyze supply chains even without kinetic attacks. Could you please comment on the existential nature of contested logistics in the Indo-Pacific as it relates to the fragility of U.S. transoceanic supply lines and the reliance on our allies and our industrial dependencies?
Yes. So one of I think the signature organizational change that has happened in the Army in the last, I'll say 7 years, go back. 7 years, so 2019-ish, is the multi-domain task force now, I think soon multi-domain command, and the reason I bring this up is it's an organization that's unique in that in the theater, that formation is actually, it's in contact in the electromagnetic spectrum with the adversary 24/7, 365. So it is sensing and seeing and tracking and identifying and understanding what's actually happening in the space, cyber, EMS, and information domain. So it is, and it's very It's very different than what we had been doing before. We didn't have a formation that was present and persistent to be able to do that. So it's understanding what's actually happening in a foreign country operating forward. And there's an enormous amount of value with an organization that is doing that while campaigning and doing day-to-day operations. So I believe that that organization and the change that it can create has been really remarkable, not just for the Army, but for the Joint Force and for the allies and partners. I sent a note out the other day, again, I'll leave the name of the country agnostic, but they basically are writing about the multi-domain task forces in their own countries to advocate for these kinds of formations to their political leadership because they see the value of what it's doing. Its value is in deterrence because it's out there campaigning every day and it's in the electromagnetic spectrum and it's doing all of the lethal and non-lethal targeting that has to happen during campaigning because it's too late once the bullets start flying. One other thing about the multi-domain task force, and it's so different than what we've had. It changes command and control, sustainment, protection, collection. It changes every warfighting function that we operate under because it's just a unique formation. But one story that's not often told is we couldn't explain it. We didn't even know, we just went from multi-domain battle to a series of war games, and then it went to multi-domain operations, and then we had this multi-domain task force with an experimental MTO, a TDA. And I remember, actually Secretary McCarthy at the time, he said, we can't explain this thing. And it was actually, I was talking to somebody earlier, Walt Pyatt, myself were sitting there with General McConnell and Secretary McCarthy, and we said, well, we need to stand one up and put a commander in charge of it. So off went Jim Eisenhower, now the commander of CAC to JDLM. But what the important part of the story is and the lesson that I took from this was, if we had waited for the hardware to be delivered, if we had waited for us to have an MRC battery with an SM-6 and a Tomahawk, if we had waited for Titan, if we had waited for Hades, if we had waited for HIMARS, PRISM, right, then we would only now be standing those organizations up. So the important part of this was that there's really three things that come together to create new operational concepts: organizations, capabilities, and I put technologies in the middle. Organizations and capabilities are really hard to change, right? It's force structure, and you've got to buy hardware. And so the 3-year advance, the 3-year head start that the multi-domain task force organization had on the delivery of the hardware was really the power of what came out of that. So we basically put an experimental organization out in the Pacific and said, go. And we worked a process to try to deliver capabilities to it on time. And the lesson that I take away from that is that there's risk in changing your organizations, but if you have a new operational concept and you haven't changed your organizations, then you don't have a new operational concept. You actually have to change your organizations. It takes a lot of time, it's very hard, and it's costly. You have to change the capabilities. Those are very costly, but the thing that's happening is technology's changing too fast, and so if you don't stay ahead with your organizational changes, I can promise you the technology is going to get out in front of you, and you'll be playing catch-up the whole time. We're on the advent of that right now with AI. And so I believe that what we learned from the multi-domain task force, we're now going to multi-domain commands and putting task forces under it. It's kind of, we're at multi-domain operations, I'll say 3.0. For some of you that you might say it's 2.0, I'm saying it's 3.0 because of where it came from. And you know what? That's a good thing. There should be a 4.0, 5.0, because The enemy is learning just as fast as we are. Technology is changing just almost too quickly. So we have to be able to learn to change our organizations fast and adapt and modify our capabilities very, very quickly, because that's what our adversaries are doing.
Sir, we've only got about 5 minutes left. No,
Ran
it's
over.
been, no, you have, it's fantastic. And I've got a few, and I'd like to go on kind of a speed dating kind of thing here with regard to the major issues associated with supply chains in the context of potential war in the Indo-Pacific AOR. In terms of the distinct but highly interconnected challenges, and I have identified 8 such challenges. There are a myriad of others. It depends on how you slice and dice them. But I'm going to go down through each one, and I'd like to get you to just make a brief comment about each one and how those challenges can be addressed and overcome.
Okay.
Tyranny of distance and time, transit lanes, and communications, and the theater bottlenecks. Tyranny of distance and time is a challenge.
Multimodal solutions. We need air, we need cargo, we need unmanned, we need autonomous, we need forward position. That theater requires it all. So multimodal solutions is the only way to overcome it. One other thing, you're also going to need access agreements. You can't do this without the countries in the region accepting your delivery, accepting your position. So,
Adversaries, A2AD, kinetic threats to fixed nodes, as well as interdiction of supply routes. A2AD by our adversaries.
we have to position hard power forward yesterday. Hard power is the only way to stop what they're doing. Demonstrating it, using it, shooting it, moving it, sustaining it. They need to see that, because then they'll go, shit, I'm in trouble. And that's what we want.
That's true.
Every day he needs to wake up and go, not today. And that buys time on the clock for us to get that position, expand the capabilities, message what the hell we're doing, demonstrate our political will, and have no war.
We talked about this last evening, but the shift from just in time to just in case, the vulnerability of precision, and I mean that very sincerely, the vulnerability of precision, push versus pull reposition.
Well, I think I was a senior colonel, brand new brigadier general, and everybody was talking about just-in-time logistics. Right now, we're suffering as a result of that business concept that was brought to the military. Because I'm a fan of the letter P, because it stands for plenty. We need a bunch of shit. And so, like, this is a problem. And by the way, people in uniform, we were asking for more, okay? The military was like, we need more, we need more, we need more. Because just in time for what? Just in time for my position to be compromised, or to have something land on top of me? We're suffering from this. And you add that to our manufacturing base 15 years ago, right? And then you look at, again, steel, pharmaceuticals, critical minerals, shipbuilding, I could go on, 10. You can look it up. 10 sectors the Communist Chinese Party went after. And they own them. So, we're suffering from this. And I don't know, I told a story to somebody the other day. Short range, I told John Rafferty yesterday. We had a SHORAD capability in the United States Army when I came in. All right? Stinger, Chaparral, Vulcan, those sound familiar to you?
Oh, yeah.
We gutted the short range air defense artillery branch. We just got, because for the entire time I was in the Middle East, I never looked up and felt threatened. Other than when a Katyusha rocket was coming at me, but nothing flying was enemy, okay? But the point I made later when I was at G3 was like, we took that branch down in 3 years. It's going to take us 10 years to rebuild it, okay? So for those out there that think that we're going to regain control of processing of critical minerals and manufacturing of batteries, magnets, semiconductors, steel, it's not going to happen in 3 or 4 years. Like, we have to come up with a campaign to do this. And by the way, it's not going to be solved by the primes. In the defense side, or like USA Rare Earth, or MP Materials, or RE Alloy, you pick some of the big boys over in the critical mineral space. They're important, but we need to get junior miners involved in this. We need to get processing capacity. The Army's involved in this. I mean, I think it's incredibly important, and I'm passionate about it because if we can't make batteries, and we can't make magnets, and we can't make semiconductors or fab them and protect them, we're going to have a hell of a time economically in the long haul. We have to regain those skills. Here's a statistic. 2029, 50% of the mining industry is going to be of retirement age. We're graduating maybe 300 metallurgists in this country a year. China is making more than 10,000 a year. People, those are people, okay, that are metallurgists. And we took all that rock crushing, toll processing, land management, physical separation, physical benefit. We just said, do it in China. We've got a problem, folks. And we need an end-to-end. I told this story to Chris yesterday. Sorry, I'll leave the company unnamed. They make magnets. You put 5 mason jars on the table. I was in there just listening to the CEO. There was a private equity guy over here at BCI. Magnets in jar 5, and then there's lumps of material in the other 4. And he got done talking. I said, which jar do you own? Supply-wise. He said from jar 3 to 4, and then the magnet. And these magnets are not family photo magnets. Okay, these aren't refrigerator magnets. These are F-22, F-35s, right? Phones. I said, where are the other 2 jars? So I don't know. It's processing. Without saying what he was saying was, that's made in China. So the raw materials we pull out of our dirt, and we pull iron ore out, we send it to China, process it in back. 90% of it, okay? So if we don't own that part of the supply chain, back to early 25, February and April, if we do something, the counter volley is not necessarily rockets and missiles, it's we're going to choke supply chain. And we're going to choke rare earth elements, we're going to choke critical minerals. Why? Because we own 90% of the process. So if we want to regain end-to-end manufacturing, we need to go back and say, how do we control our raw materials? And then what are we going to do with the raw materials to store them, like we do with oil? But we haven't been doing that with some of the other things. Penicillin. I mean, all the bio stuff. To me, I read about it, but it wasn't my job in uniform. And I was watching it and thinking, this is not good. But now that I'm out of uniform, this is the good part about being out of uniform. You can talk about this shit. You know?
You're a lot more vocal, sir. You're a lot more vocal.
Freedom! Liberating!
Look forward to that, sir.
All right. I'm probably done now.
The challenge of multi-domain disruptions to command and control. Logistics relies on data. Cyber warfare, degraded comms, denied, interrupted, intermittent comms. The disruptions to command and control is a challenge. Resolution. How do we resolve? How do we address that?
Well, I mean, this is not just technology. I actually think my personal view on this is every exercise that we conduct out there, whether it's joint, Army, all the services, we have to put in place our combination of network architecture that we're going to fight off of. And I'm of the view, in fact, I think Huntsville plays a big role in this. I talked with Chris yesterday about we have the ability to extend a live, virtual, and constructive training range in the Western Pacific from the Rocky Mountains all the way to the Asian continent. The U.S. Army owns a sim center, a really good sim center in Korea, really good sim center in Sagami Depot in Japan, Guam, Kwajalein in the Marshall Islands, incredibly important site. Hawaii, Alaska, JBLM, Fort Carson, Colorado, San Diego. Now, everything I just mentioned to you there, there's a sim. Navy has a sim center in Fort Island in Hawaii. I don't think they have a sim center in Guam. But the point I'm making is like the ability for us to be able to put live forces in that range, I'll call it that range complex, and have virtual and constructive wrap for every exercise, and be on the system that you're actually going to fight on. That's where we need industry's help. Because we can't set up a live virtual and constructive network that's for sims or for an exercise and then recreate something for war. We need to be on the war one and use that every day out there. And I think actually that's where industry could really help, and we could overcome a lot of problems with the tyranny out here, because it's not just distance, it's the EMS, it's the information environment, it's your access, it's overflight, it's a range of things.
Other challenge, consumption disparity. High demand, special classes of supply. You've addressed this in your comments earlier, but expand on it a little bit. Now we'll resolve the classified, supply the ammunition and precision munitions.
Well,
bulk fuel and medical supplies.
I mean, I think these recent operations in the Middle East and in Europe are, they're a stark reminder that just in time for what? And so we need, but it's not stockpile. Of course, it's not stockpiles. It's the manufacturing capacity to be able to turn on a factory line and be able to say, I need you to go from 1 a month to 15 a month. And that's where some risk needs to be taken on investment, because we basically don't have that manufacturing backbone to turn it on that quickly. I mean, when one country owns 90% of the processing capacity, you've got a problem. And so you're going to have to return some of that. It's not going to, again, this part of it, I think, I'm very encouraged with the money that's being deployed, but when you look at like under the hood, are all the pistons firing? Are the belts moving? Is it well oiled? And I think that's the next chapter of what we need to be paying attention to, because I think that's what I get worried about.
The final challenge that I'm going to pose you with is the political and legal friction between allies and partners, weak multilateral frameworks, and operational sovereignty.
Yeah.
How does that address?
So, thanks for that question. I wasn't expecting, but I'm glad you did. But I mean, here's back to and this is my shtick, okay? I mean, I know I'm known for this. But actually, one of the things that weathers all of the political unrest or rhetoric or debate or policy problems is military diplomacy, is exercises, okay? I'll tell you a story. There was a coup in Thailand, and the chief of the army at the time, obviously the king said, we're going to use the army to do what we need to do. So a lot of sanctions go in place, and the Department of State, et cetera, et cetera. The chief of the army in Thailand was a classmate of General Odierno from the Army War College. And he was the only person that was able to talk to a senior official in Thailand about what was going on and sort of keep the temperature down. And I say that because many of you may not realize this, Cobra Gold in Thailand, China sends 25 soldiers to Cobra Gold. They go and do the humanitarian assistance exercise part of it, because that's where they go and that's what they'll do. But we do that, and we do that with the consent of an ally, Thailand. And I guess the point I'm making here is that I think that one of the greatest strengths of the military and our exercises is our ability to continue to have back and forth dialogue, continue to have exercises, continue to train together, continue to send people to schools and do conferences, even though the political situation may be a bit murky, rusty, or unhealthy by way of debate. And so again, I think that I think that, you know, gets challenging sometimes for diplomats, and rightfully so, because they are the State Department, they're having to, you know, lead in a diplomatic way. But, you know, the exercises go on, and the training goes on, and those relationships go on, and rightfully so. And I think that it really is a port in the storm during politically challenging times.
That's not often recognized for the strength that it brings to our nation's deterrence and to our nation's defense. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm thank you and round of applause. We're going to be taking about a 15-minute break. If you'll come back in and take your seats, this is about 25 after. 25 after 10, so very much. Come on back in. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we're ready to start our late morning. I want to say afternoon because it seems like it's afternoon, but it's only late morning briefing, keynote address by our own Army Materiel Commanding General, Lieutenant General Mohan. I introduced him earlier, but I want to say that how this may not be more addresses you're going to make. Not many. This may be it. No. We're so happy to have you this morning. Thank you so very much. We're going to bring up General Mohan's show, the slideshow, if you will, please.
Hey, look, so, I bet there's a bunch of you in this room that are envying me right now because I get to follow General Flynn. And so for the folks in the back, I've just totally blown up my entire presentation because what I'd like to do is take a few minutes to pull the thread on some of the basically the imperatives that General Flynn and Joe laid out in their talk, and then talk to you a little bit about the things that we're doing to get after some of those, because what you're going to see is the groundwork that he laid when he was the USAPAC commander. We're executing those. So I've got basically 3 really quick points, and then one centering point at the very end about why we do what we do. So the first one is data. And so as we think about data in the Army Materiel Command, it's critical to everything we're doing. And I only have 15 minutes, so I'm kind of going to speed date through some of these. So first of all, we look at supply chain resilience and the way we manage supply chain through a different lens now. And it all started about 15 months ago when my guys came to me and said, hey, look, we've developed this new application, this new system called Weapons 360. Which was born out of a capability that was NIN 360, which was a very geeky way for us to look at individual requisitions in the supply system. And what we were discovering was that our forecasting to our industry partners, one, you could not only see our data, our forecasting sucked, quite frankly. And then we peeled that back and we said, okay, so now that we have a better viewpoint of our supply chain and down to the part level, how are we looking at readiness? And so out of that was born Weapons 360, which is really a fundamental shift in the way that we look at readiness in the Army. And for those of you who have been around, we have this thing called the Total Army Readiness Review, which is looking at the health of our units from a personnel field standpoint, from a training standpoint, from a supply field standpoint, how much equipment they have, and then down to the serviceability of that equipment. But we were always looking backwards in time. At best, it was a 30-day-old snapshot. At worst, it was 60 days old because we were pulling that data after the actual fact. So now we flip that on its head. Weapons 360. We are now using that as the authoritative system in the TAR, and we can look and project forward of what the readiness of those units is going to look like. We also have integrated AI tools into that capability, and we can ask it, like you asked ChatGPT, hey, I have $50 million to spend on M1 tank maintenance. M1s are probably our biggest consumer for training on the modern battlefield of the capabilities that we provide, man hours and dollars for repair parts. And what we found is that we can do in about 3 minutes what it would take analysts about 6 weeks to do. And the answers that we get now are astounding because we have, all of us who have been doing this for a while, we have a sense of your gut instincts. And we get answers out of the system of that, how to spend that $50 million that are unlike anything that I would have thought. And we can do it, pull it down to the bumper number of the vehicle, and it will give us answers like, go grab this bumper number, this bumper number, this bumper number, because they are consuming the most man hours and the most Class 9 dollars, and then put them to a depot overhaul. We have always approached it from a unit base, and we're going to do a fleet, or a fleet base, and now we're doing that from unit base as an example. The other one is that I will tell you is that for those of you that are really geeky and are really interested in how we're doing our ERPs, Logistics Modernization Program, GCSS Army, et cetera, we are embarking on a new journey where we are completely going to flip the way we think about enterprise readiness programs, which is really the heart of how we manage. And my term that I talk about is that we consider them in a lot of places, like the Pentagon will say, those are business systems. Not anymore. They are warfighting platforms. Because what we have to have is an integrated ecosystem that allows the soldiers to use in the motor pool what they're going to use in an exercise in the Philippines, or if we're fighting from the Philippines, and we have to have visibility of that data. And so we are cleaning up. We're reducing the complexity of our transactional core, and then we're going to have an ecosystem of applications that are much like your phone, and we've already rolled some of them out. And so that application that can tell you how to download and can download for you files for advanced manufacturing that we have on our digital repository, for example. Pull those files down, manufacture far forward, and then move out and do what you need to do from a standpoint of training or combat. That is not the way that we were designed to run as little as 90 days ago, and we were changing that. And so those files will integrate on and off just like your cell phone. And so those applications, and we have an application, for example, to change the way that we do property accountability at the motor pool, in the company arms room, et cetera. We also have an application that we're rolling out that will change the way that soldiers do maintenance in the motor pool or far forward, to complete with AI-enabled maintenance capability, which we are now exporting depot-level tasks all the way down to the soldier, with an eye on that very violent, very distributed, and really hard to get to battlefield. We're using the Pacific as the model for that. And then you take the ability to see the data, you take the ability to export depot-level tasks, you take the ability to do advanced manufacturing far forward, and then you throw in the top layer of autonomous delivery and autonomous delivery systems, and then you have a truly groundbreaking change in the way that we do sustainment on the modern battlefield. So that's data. The next one is access and placement. Look, access and placement is everything, and General Flynn talked about the Pacific. What has having commanded the 21st TSC, there's a huge disparity between the two. So the European continent, which the United States Army has always pulled to the European continent, right? Because we love it, right? We love it. It's got, besides having good beer and bratwurst, it's got autobahns, 8 lanes of highways. It's got fuel depots there, a pipeline on the continental European continent. It has the Rhine River Valley, which is heavy manufacturing, the heart of the Ruhr Valley. It's got everything we want and that we love. And in the Pacific, and oh, by the way, we have the capability in the continental United States to rapidly reinforce. So let's think about Charleston and the complex of Charleston right now. So Charleston, you have We have a heavy port. There's an airfield at Charleston Air Force Base. And then you throw on top of that the heavy maintenance facility that we have right in the same, within 20 miles of each other. We have reinforced the European continent since the Russian invasion of Ukraine to the tune of well over 200 shiploads of capability. And we can take that shipload of capability, rapidly marshal it, what we need at Charleston, put it on a ship, make a quick phone call to American roll-on, roll-off carriers, ARC, and say, hey, look, I'm going to authorize a max steam, and we can have stuff on the European continent in about 10 days. Meanwhile, we can flow the forces out of Charleston Air Force Base, C-17s, wide-body commercial aircraft, and they can land in Ramstein in, depending upon winds, 8 hours. Think about going to the Pacific. As I say in the Pacific, everything is 8 hours. Everything is 8 hours. So you get on a plane in Huntsville, you fly to Hawaii, at least 8 hours. You get on a plane in Hawaii, and you fly to Guam, at least 8 hours. And it just keeps, everything's 8 hours. 35-day sail. And if you have to go through the Panama Canal, you add not only a significant more amount of time, but also cost, because the fees to go through the Panama Canal. So you have this huge disparity. So that's why we made the strategic decision to land-base Army preposition stocks in INDOPACOM, and it was led by General Flynn. There was not only the access and placement, because so here's the other thing that Europe has. It has an alliance, and the Schengen zone, right, where goods and services, customs barriers are naturally taken down because of the alliance. In Indo-PACOM, it's almost all bilateral relationships. And it's great to have the embassy and the ambassadors sign an agreement, a flowery agreement that says, hey, we're going to do this. But hey, where the rubber meets the road for my business is at the customs dock. And how long does it take to get stuff through customs? And the only way that you do that is to exercise that muscle memory. So when we place Army preposition stocks in the Philippines, they're there. In Australia, they are now there. And oh, by the way, they are stored in warehouses that were built by the United States Army in the 1940s. And when we place that, and we have to maintain them, not only do we access local workforce, build that sticky power that comes from American dollars, but we also build the capability, but we have to exercise the routine day-to-day business of sustainment. That means customs. That means doing services on vehicles. That means accessing local transportation networks. And that's why that access and placement is so incredibly important. I mean, now the next steps are to exercise it appropriately, not as a rental car fleet, but as a truly embedded in with strategic and operational training objectives, so that we are meeting the objectives of the ASCC commander and the combatant commander of exercising that APS, as well as exercising the muscle movements and the muscle memory in our own organizations of how to issue it rapidly, but also the approval process. Because you can imagine a big bureaucracy has lots of rules about who accesses APS and how they access it, et cetera, et cetera. All those are enabled by access and placement. And lastly, for access and placement is force structure. Look, we are incredibly reliant upon forces, and I'm talking sustainment, that are hard to get to. Compo 2, Compo 3 units. And I have tons of partners in the National Guard and the Army Reserve. Hell, I started in the National Guard. My brother's still a full-time guardsman in North Carolina. But it is incredibly difficult to get to them in the speed that we need to get to them early on into in a conflict or in that competition moving towards crisis. That is why having access to those units as they are forward, and I did it all the time in the 21st TSC, had the 7th Mission Support Command that worked for me in the 21st Army Reserve Unit, and we were constantly bringing that capability on and off, active duty, bringing them in early for training to do exercises. When the Russians invaded Ukraine, we brought a bunch of those folks on very quickly to help us provide that deterrent, et cetera, et cetera. We have to do the same thing in the Philippines. We also, in INDOPACOM, we must address the force balance that we have in the active component, and we're making some investments. A new sustainment brigade in INDOPACOM. Just kidding, look at my guy, right? So anyway, so access and placement. The last one is your organic industrial base. The organic industrial base is undergoing a rapid transformation. We are increasingly making critical investments in the OIB, both from a standpoint of advanced robotics, connecting everything with data, and then finally on this one is that we, ANC, have been designated as the lead for the United States Army for advanced manufacturing, and we are rapidly scaling our advanced manufacturing capability, not only from a standpoint of in practice. So, for example, later this month, we will, and getting right to the heart of the critical minerals issue, we are opening and we'll officially cut the ribbon on one of what we believe is 2 brushless motor lines for UAS. We will open one in Tobyhanna that will produce hundreds of thousands of brushless motors. And I say it's one of 2 because we have mapped all the way down to where the magnets are coming from to ensure it's U.S. sourced. It's only one of 2 that we can find in the United States. And those brushless motors will be provided to industry through the UAS marketplace, particularly to the smalls, where we see a lot of the UAS innovation happening at that rapid scale. We're also building other components, carbon fiber-based UAS bodies, wiring harnesses, batteries. Batteries is a big issue, as General Flynn mentioned. We've had our share of counterfeit lithium cells that we've had to work our way through. But part of our OIB transformation strategy is not only utilizing the current capacity that we have in the organic industrial base, but totally exploding in our mindset. How do we take that capability and reform it for the future? So, for example, batteries. We know we need batteries. And look, we assemble batteries every day for radios, for radars, etc. So we know how to do this. But what if we take and we have one of our depots that sits on one of the largest deposits of lithium in the United States. Actually, it's one of the largest in the world. And we take and we do a public-private partnership with the company that does the extraction, the separation, and then we have another company that comes in and actually builds a factory that builds battery cells that comes from the lithium that is right under their feet. And then as our part of the deal, we get a portion of the offtake of those batteries that we use then to feed the battery line that we were standing up, which then will feed a portion of the other public-private partnership we have for advanced manufacturing, all in one facility, right? So now we have closed the loop, and we have assured supply, and we have assured demand for industry because we have that routine drumbeat of demand signal that is going out. We're doing all of that across the UIB. And then finally, we cannot forget why we're doing this. It's for our soldiers. So that our soldiers can be the most lethal fighting men and women that the world has ever seen. And we're changing the way that they live. We're actually 3D printing barracks. We will cut the ribbon later this month, or actually next week, on the entire Aruba complex, which is a training complex at the JRTC in Fort Polk. We're going to print the entire thing. And we're finishing up printing 3D printing of barracks at Fort Bliss, Texas. They're open bay troop barracks for the southwest border. We started printing them in February. We'll have troops living in them at the end of August. And a facility that's incredibly energy efficient, is naturally mold resistant, which is really important. The soldiers like them because I walk through them and talk to the soldiers that live in there. We're also changing the way we feed soldiers. We have blown up the model. We are facing headwinds right now from special interest groups, but we've blown up the model. We've opened 2 different dining facilities, one at Fort Hood and one at Fort Carson. We went from 500 soldiers a day in those dining facilities to well over 3,000 a day. It's a campus-style dining facility. It's what our soldiers deserve. It's just like you will find at the University of Alabama. I know that because it's the same company. So we have turned that into an industry and totally reformed the way we do business from a dining facility standpoint. And as a byproduct, not the most important thing, the current burn rate per plate at Fort Carson is 26% less than what we're currently paying in our legacy dining facilities. And so you ask me why and who's coming after this? It's the people who are benefiting from the old model that are coming after this, and we're fighting those headwinds. So that's a quick walk around the world. I think
You did fine, sir.
okay. But again, hard act to follow. But I'd love to have further conversations for you. Thank you very much.
Definitely against it.
We're going to set up for our panel now. You'll bring back up the agenda slides. I appreciate it. And
Hey, sir.
I hope so.
Great.
We have a great panel for you. I guess late morning panel. We've had some changes of late. You'll see only 2 chairs up here. There are 4 panels, and we've had some adjustments. We've had some contested logistics. Yes, we did. So we had to contend with, but we are bringing in all 4 panels. We have 2 panels that we're bringing in remote via Teams, via the web. So that might present a bit of a challenge. So we're going to work through that, but we're going to bring them in. We're going to have briefings up on the screen at the same time, and we're going to have a marvelous panel to finish up this morning. I want to introduce our panel moderator, Major General retired Ed Dorman. He's a highly respected leader in global sustainment, contested logistics, and strategic mobility with nearly 4 decades of service. His career culminated with assignments as the Commanding General of the U.S. Army 8th Theater Sustainment Command and Director for Logistics and Engineering, J4 at U.S. Central Command, where he led logistics planning and operations supporting joint and coalition forces across the Indo-Pacific, Middle East, and South Asia. Currently serves as Executive Vice President, COO of S10 Consulting, and Senior Advisor for Global Sustainment, Contested Logistics, and Offensive Supply Chain Operations to the DoD Irregular Warfare Center. He will serve as the panel moderator, and he will introduce the panelists for our panel. And our panel is entitled Creating Resilient Logistics Chains in the Indo-Pacific AOR. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Major General retired Ed Dorman. Ed, it's on you.
Thank you very much, Joe. And I guess I should just say with Vic here, we should probably just say thanks to General Flynn and to each of you and General Mohan. We should just say we're ready for your questions. They've actually laid it all out. There's nothing we should really say or bring to you, but no. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. Thanks so very much for your attention and thanks for joining us.
Hey, Joe.
And, Joe, thank you and everyone who's come out today. As Joe said, it's creating resilient supply chains under persistent contestation. And as General Flynn laid out, positional warfare is what it's all about, right? Because there's 3 elements of contestation that we need to think about. There's the threat. It takes many forms. We primarily talk about the PRC. There's the environment. That's really what General Flynn talked about, and that positionally. And then there's self. So you always got to think about what you're doing to yourself. And as many of you know, this forum is focused on supporting space and missile defense operations across one of the most challenging operational environments on Earth, the Indo-Pacific. Spent a lot of time thinking about this, thinking about being a subject matter expert in contested logistics. We throw that term out a lot, but I don't think we really understand it in all its dimensions. And so that's what we're going to try to get together today and talk about. And much of our professional discussion naturally centers on, in this environment, space and missile defense, I think, on the launchers, radars, interceptors, the sensors, the networks, and increasingly space-enabled capabilities, right? Yet, none of those systems matter if they cannot be sustained, protected, repaired, regenerated, powered, supplied, reinforced, and ultimately reconstituted at the forward edge. So today's discussion is intended to explore that challenge. Not simply about the transportation to get them there, not simply about inventories and magazine depth. Sure, that's important, right? But the broader ecosystem required to generate, sustain, protect, regenerate combat power under persistent contestation. Because at the end of the day, it's about credible deterrence, right? Credible deterrence. And we're fortunate to be joined by three exceptional leaders who bring strategic, operational, and future capability perspectives to this discussion. So, joining us here in Huntsville, right? Rear Admiral Vic Mercado, United States Navy retired. Admiral Mercado previously served as Assistant Secretary of Defense for Strategy, Plans, and Capabilities, and played a key role in helping shape many of the concepts that continue to influence how the Joint Force thinks about deterrence, about campaigning, and contested logistics today. Thank you for being here, Vic. It's a privilege to have you here. Thank you. Now, as I said, we're contested each and every day. General Flynn said that as well, and we are contested. And joining us virtually from ongoing operational responsibilities. First, Brigadier General Ronnie Anderson, the Deputy Commanding General of the Combined Arms Support Command and the Director of the Army's Future Capability Directorate, formerly the Army's Contested Logistics Cross-Functional Team out of Fort Lee, Virginia. Ronnie is helping the lead the Army's efforts to modernize sustainment, improve predictive sustainment capabilities, and prepare the force for future contested environments. Ronnie, we appreciate you taking a break from the action to join us today. Can you hear us, Ronnie? Can we see you?
Sir, I have you. Thanks for that introduction.
There we go.
All right, thanks for being here. Also joining us from Fort Bragg, North Carolina is Brigadier General Pete Gilbert, the Deputy Chief of Staff, Director for Logistics, G4, U.S. Army Western Hemisphere Command, formerly known as Forces Command, right? Done a lot of reorganization with a new focus, new responsibilities, particularly in the Caribbean. That Western Hemisphere Command is singularly important to much of the threat today, and many people don't understand that threat, but the threats that are coming in through our southern border and in our Western Hemisphere, particularly from the Chinese. If you look at Changi Port, where a lot of the critical minerals are being taken out of South America, being transported back from processing, many of those mines reside down there. So, Pete's joining us there. He's in the Elite Constellation series of exercises, and he's taking a break there. So Pete brings operational and theater sustainment perspectives that few can match, and is actively engaged in many of the challenges we will discuss today. So Pete, thank you for stepping away from battle rhythm events and ongoing operational demands to be with us. Can you hear us, Pete?
Well, I'm clear. Thank you so much for the invitation, sir.
Okay. You have the slide clicker.
I don't know that the slide clicker is going to work
Aha.
because your briefing is not up.
It's not up. Okay. Could we bring up the slides, please?
There they are. Bring up the teams. The teams.
There we go.
Okay,
I
so
don't know
we
that
got,
clicker's going to work.
we don't think it's gonna work. Okay, so we've got General Gilbert on the top and General Anderson on the bottom. Let me see if we can get this to work here.
Okay, could you advance the slide? In the center back there. Okay, can we still see our, oh, let's go back one. Okay,
There you go.
so, I would just offer a simple proposition. What if the true center of gravity is not the weapon system itself, but the ecosystem required to keep it operational? So kind of keep that in mind as we begin. So think about what you see there. You've got all these systems that we talked about, right? So with that in mind, I would just say,
That's not gonna do it. He's gonna have to just, yeah.
so what matters more? When most people think about missile defense readiness, they naturally think about Patriot, right? Air missile defense. But you've got these other systems down here, THAAD, LTADS, Aegis, and rightly so. What matters more, the weapon systems or the industrial base, workforce, energy, semiconductors, transportation systems, the supply chains, the data, the alliances required to sustain? What matters more? You're the audience. You're out there. Anybody?
All of it.
That's like saying which sibling do you love more?
There you go.
You better not.
Well, I would say that.
The one that produces grandchildren.
Both, right?
That's Josh, yeah. That's it.
All right. Well, it's actually both, right? So we can't really get the slides to work. But it's both, right? Because one can't exist without the other.
Yeah.
Right?
Correct answer.
So, because logistics is deterrence, right? Logistics is deterrence, and we have to think about it that way. So, if we could.
Just tell them to advance in the
So
booth.
please advance the slide. Go ahead, another. Go ahead. Okay, so we'll just, please, one more. Go ahead. Next slide. Next slide, please. So, Vic, with that in mind, what is contested logistics? You were busy when we wrote this, so I thought I'd let you start on that. You had a unique vantage point during the development of the Joint Warfighting Concept.
Okay, thanks, General Dorman. First of all, it's great to be here. My second time in Huntsville. I think I briefed it one time virtually. Went to the last Space and Missile Defense Symposium. It was phenomenal, and now I'm here. Appreciate the invitation. Good to be here as a straight man for General Flynn and working here alongside this panel and for General Dorman. And again, I'll be the straight man for General Flynn because, you know, when I talked with Ed a little bit beforehand, it's instructive and informational to know the genesis of the joint warfighting concept, how we got to where we are today. General Flynn said we're now at 3-0, right? But if we liken back to around 2020 and Trump won, right? When there was a pull from the Congress, there was a pull from the Secretary of Defense, the Joint Staff, and all the services that says, we need a unifying joint warfighting concept. How else can we fund and procure weapon systems if we don't know the concept by which we are going to fight as a joint force? So how to organize that was interesting. As you look at all the different scenarios, and there were a ton, and General Flynn talked about it, we had to focus on the most stressing scenario. There was some pushback because some people say we're not just going to build a force that can fight in one theater, it has to be global. But in a policy standpoint, working with the Joint Staff, we said we got to focus on the most stressing scenario, and that's in the Pacific. And then we had, General Flynn talked about theories of victory. We weren't concerned at that point with deterrence because we knew we had to deter, but how do you win? Okay, so when that was done, then we looked at what is out there. And I know General Dorman and folks were defining contested logistics back in like 2015 or so. But there are certain concepts that were like, we call them orphans. People didn't like that term. But I'll go through the 4 of them, right? And 2 are very, self-evident. One was fires. One was JADC-2. Guess what the Air Force really loved and wanted to own? JADC-2. And there were 2 others that are really relevant today. One was information decision advantage, and the other was contested logistics. And yes, when you go through and we had to assign who had to own each of these orphans or concepts, Air Force said, I got JADC-2. No kidding. Navy got fires. I guess that was the easiest. You want to give the sailors the easiest. Army, because of the mission that they were performing in the Pacific, was the natural service to lead contested logistics. Now, information advantage, no one wanted it back then. Nobody. It wound up right in the Joint Staff. It wound up in J7 to kind of corral that. And I would argue that the 2 most consequential areas that we need to win are those 2. Yeah. Information decision advantage and contested logistics. Just like General Flynn said. If we don't win those 2, then we've lost. Okay, so that again is kind of the background, and Ed and I were talking beforehand, not a lot is out there. A lot of that is being developed here in these forums, the actual. You go into the SCIFs in the Joint Staff, and you look at 2, there is some thought on contested logistics, but it's very classified, and it has to be. Okay, so just to reiterate what General Flynn said, is that, and from a Navy standpoint, because I am the token Navy person here, when you look at the warfighting construct, it is no longer a supporting concept. If you go into how it is working, there is an operational commander given that mission of contested logistics in all phases. Okay? We're past the traditional, hey, achieve maritime superiority. We see some of that in the Middle East on air superiority. In the Pacific, it's not going to be like that. It's going to be in all domains. It may be fleeting, it may be temporal. We need to be able to, and we'll talk about this probably later, of how to anticipate that, how to predict it, how to use AI, what you need to do. I can go in later on kind of the whole planning process, how you go from a planning construct, you look at posture, then you look at, access spacing, overflights, those relationships you need to set the theater for success, all of the above, and how industry has to be able to support that. Because the joint warfighting concept, General Hyten's concept after that was supposed to drive the JROC. And capabilities that were being developed had to go past that scrutiny to get advocacy by the Joint Force and sell through the Congress. Anyways, that's a little bit of the background.
But it's great to see, because I think the concept has not really evolved as intended. It's kind of, the reality is chasing faster than our ability to implement. But we've at least got congressional focus on it, right? But we're using it more of a noun. So we've got 3 people in charge, right? So 334's come out. We've got the DepSecDef. It's kind of like a GOSC. So we've got really nobody in charge. A General Officer Steering Committee, but there's nobody in charge. So we've got the DepSecDef. We've got the chairman and the chiefs, right? And then we have this operational integrator, the chairman and the commander of U.S. Transcom, General Reed, right? He is the operational integrator, so he's closest to it to get it operationally integrated. And he's moving out and doing some things like that. So that's a good sign, right? So that we're kind of trying to make sure that we're looking at it. He's got a con log set up, and he's got a report coming out in July to Congress. And he's going to need some help from industry, because it's now a GIMC. It is joint, it is interagency, right? It is not just the DOW, right? and it is multinational, right? And it's commercial, right? So it's GMC. We cannot do it without our industry partners. Our industry partners we must have. So I would say we got to think about that. So we need industry. We're so interdependent with our industry partners. That's where you come in with cutting edge of where we can go and helping us see what is the art of the possible. We have to listen to you, right? So that's one of the things we have to do. And so, Ronnie, I'd come out to you and say, how has the Army's understanding of contested logistics evolved since you were the director of the cross-functional team, the Army's contested logistics cross-functional team, and now the director of the Future Capabilities Directorate? Over.
Sir, thank you. Do you in the audience hear me okay?
Yeah.
Sir, thank you. I think, as a career sustainer, we've known contested logistics since Napoleon and the great captains. At the time, it was called, at that time, in a lot of our doctrinal conversations, it was discussed in terms of attacking your enemy's rear. All the commanders were forward, and the rear areas were where the supply trains always sustained the battlefield. So I believe the Army has always been aware of it. I don't want to, wax on and on about, what the doctrinal definition of it is. But if you would, endure me for just a moment, I took the opportunity to kind of look up some real world public headlines that demonstrate what it is that the audience may be able to relate to a little bit more easily, and I'll read through several conflicts. In Operation Iraqi Freedom, this is a headline from one of our media outlets. Insurgent IED campaign severely degrades main supply route security and increases sustainment risk along Iraq's ground line of communication. Operation Enduring Freedom, Taliban ambushes and route denial in Hindu Kush force air-centric resupply and drive reliance on high-cost airdrop. Epic Fury, most recent operation. Iranian missile and drone threat-focused forces Transcom to reroute strategic cliff. And I love the chart that you have up there thinking about when does contested logistics begin. So let's talk about the Indo-Pacific. Beijing weaponizes global tech supply chains, embedding vulnerabilities in Chinese-made hardware that underpins Western logistics networks. Chinese dominance in critical minerals creates strategic vulnerability for allied ammunition and high-tech munitions production. And then finally, as we get into operations, prospective PRC blockade operations in South China Sea put trillions in annual trade and key energy flows at risk. So those are real-world examples of what contested sustainment is and how it is going to look in the Indo-Pacific theater, or now the Pacific theater and PACOM that we've gone back to. And I think some of those headlines start to demonstrate that contested logistics is going to be from now until the conflict ends, and it's exactly what is demonstrated on the chart. So,
thanks, Ronnie. So, Pete, let's shift to you from a theater. You're in the theater, you're at war, we're at war. So what does it look like from a perspective of a theater sustainment leader in Western Hemisphere?
Hey, sir, I just want to start by thanking General Flynn and General Mohan for their leadership. The way they framed both the organic defense industrial base here in the homeland and all the things, that are ongoing in the Indo-Pacific, it's just a very complex, ambiguous sort of problem set. To answer your question, the chart that's up right now, when does contested logistics begin? The answer, from my perspective, here at Western United States Army Western Hemisphere Command, going commander to two co-coms, one com and South com, it actually begins way left off this chart in campaigning, and that's occurring now. as we come out of the Elite Constellation series here, we have looked very, very hard at sort of the algorithmic warfare construct and vulnerabilities and risk, accelerated vertical risk to the point that there are national security interests that need to be taken into consideration that we need to look at. Cyber incursions, tens of thousands are happening every day. They don't impact Department of War agencies and organizations, but our federal, state, local entities, and you can trace this back all the way into the commercial sector. The interesting piece about the commercial sector, when you look at the Department of War, once the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, the commercial sector skyrocketed. We are looking at advancements in semiconductors, low power edge computing, and software upgradable microelectronics. That is absolutely, those discussions should have been happening, sort of in the late 90s, from my perspective. So a lot to unpack, on your answer, but I'll just start with that.
Thanks, Pete. Well, I would just go back and say, we are at war today with the PRC. The protracted stage of warfare has already begun, right? The manufacturing, as General Flynn said, they're 100 miles from their fight, right? So the reason my title at the Irregular Warfare Center as Senior Advisor says, Senior Advisor for Global Sustainment, Contested Logistics, and Offensive Supply Chain Operations, is we have to go on the offensive. They have been on the offensive for a long time, right? And we have to treat the supply chain as maneuver terrain. The supply chain has multiple layers, and we need to be exploiting that to create positions of advantage for ourselves and create dilemmas inside of the multiple layers of supply chain: financial, transportation, contracting, etc. All of those layers of the supply chain create opportunities for us to maneuver and create dilemmas for our adversary. The ability to maneuver sustainment, military, commercial, and industrial before crisis is increasingly what determines whether deterrence holds or fails. Now, we used to do offset strategies, and those deter through capability. Our adversaries contest through position. We need to get into the positional business, as General Flynn said. Until the United States learns to do both, preparing through technology while contesting through sustainment maneuver, it will remain reactive in the very terrain where rivals wage daily war. And they're in the protracted war now. As Seth Jones recently observed, the Pentagon's focus on emerging technologies and offsets has outpaced its development of new operational concepts. We must have operational concepts. Technology makes possible the revolution, but as the late Andrew Marshall, who ran the net assessment team, who I knew well, reminds us, the revolution itself takes place only when new concepts of operation develop. And Henry Farrell and Abraham Newman noted that the United States, having long weaponized the infrastructure of globalization, must now defend its own vulnerabilities as others learn to leverage economic choke points of their own. So we need to get after this. So quick check on learning of the audience out here if you've been listening. Quick show of hands. How many people believe contested logistics begins once the first missile is launched? Anybody?
Too late.
All right, that's too late, right. So let's explore that. So next slide, please. We see when contested logistics begin, so it's not just a competition phase activity. So Ronnie, let's go back out. What future capabilities should we be building now and that will matter 10 years from now?
Love to hear this one.
Sir, thank you. That's a great question, and it's where I spend the vast majority of my time and energy and mental capacity right now for the future capabilities directorate. So we're on a journey to develop our sustainment modernization campaign plan and Project Orion with Major General Schneider as the PAE for agile sustainment and ammunition. And I've been very clear since I got into this position that we have to solve 5 problems. The problems are broad, but for the new way that we're going to operate and the conceptual work that we're working on and where doctrine is pushing us and where technology is pushing us, we have to solve 5 problems. autonomous distribution. Being distributed, disaggregated over longer lines of communications and potentially across multiple archipelago islands, we're going to have autonomous distribution in the air, on the surface, and on ground. We have to solve predictive sustainment. So that is seeing everything on the battlefield, understanding and I'm talking about our assets, whether that's a person, a tank, or a repair part, and then being able to write the algorithmic solution to optimize the distribution problem. We will no longer have a day where the commander who has possession of that commodity actually owns it, but they will have access to it, and as will everyone else. Asset visibility actually enables the predictive sustainment, so we have to do that. And then energy. One of the biggest challenges that we have in any theater for any operation is moving fuel around the battlefield. We're never going to get away from it, but the sooner we can learn to reduce that requirement through improved and enhanced new technologies with batteries, with hybrid electric combat platforms and sustainment platforms. Everything we do right now, if it is a distribution platform, we are asking those distribution platforms to have energy storage on board, so when they go forward, whether it's a cargo UAS, whether it's an autonomous resupply event, or a autonomous ground resupply vehicle, or it's one of our ground vehicles, we will generate energy, move that energy forward on the battlefield, and then offboard that energy to the operating force where they are. And then the last thing that we have to solve is casualty evacuation. As most folks know, the pace, the scale, and the prediction of large-scale combat operation casualties far outpaces our ability to actually medevac casualties. So we are going to have to be brilliant at the basics of casualty evacuation. Over.
Thanks, Ronnie. I'll go over to Pete. So Pete, as an operational guy down there in the Western Hemisphere, what operational preparations concern you the most based on what Ronnie's talking about in those 5 concept required capabilities that he's talking about for, both in competition? How are you looking at mapping, your theater for that, and then once crisis and conflict? Over.
Thanks, sir. I have to go back to campaigning. The sustainment preparation of the environment is absolutely critical, but it's not necessarily always from the lens of the Department of War. This really, and I go out to the audience here, this really needs to be taken under some hard considerations, from the commercial sector. If we're serious about defense, if we're serious about protecting the homeland, there are a number of emerging technologies, great pieces of equipment that could maybe some of these things be integrated into what we're doing from a land component perspective, but it's not just a land component perspective. It's the joint force, joint all domain. This was Vic talked about this a little bit. Joint all domain warfare. I think some of the things we're concerned about are happening right now in the Fury open source. Transition to sustainment for some of these pieces of equipment, modernized equipment, or autonomous systems. How would we sustain these in depth from a pace and tempo at which they are going to be used? Indo-Pacific is a very complex problem, right? Anything not west of the IDL is not really considered useful. And so, defense industrial base complex or forward repair activity, kind of in the COCOM or in the region. The Secretary of War has a program out there. I think we're starting to see some of that in CENTCOM and the Indo-Pacific under the regional sustainment framework construct. This is absolutely where we need to go, just just from reconstitution standpoint. Our supply lines are way too long. The transportation architecture and infrastructure is going to be at risk because of the requirements. I think I go back to Ron Anderson at Cascon, and it's the transition to sustainment. Do we have the magazine depth not only in the OIB, but can we depend on the defense industrial base? Over.
That's great.
And sir, could I pull the thread on that just a little bit further?
Absolutely.
Sir, I think this goes back to the comments you made earlier about positioning and GMC and how we've approached campaigning, right? We need the whole of government to be thinking about regional sustainment framework, but also opening doors to our partners in the Pacific so our commercial partners can get into those countries. And first of all, it will improve economies of our partners in the region, but it will also build a foundation for where we can do production further forward, so that we can do defense industrial base production further forward, so that we can enable the regional sustainment framework. And I think that C also has, it has a multiplier out there in parenthetical that's whole of government that opens that up. So,
well, that's great. And Ronnie, I want to build on something you said earlier. Energy is beyond just the fuel and the batteries. Energy helps do manufacturing if it's done well. And while it won't alleviate all manufacturing, it helps consistently with advanced manufacturing like additive and subtractive and form and casting and things like that. But I'll come over to Vic and say, when we look at industry and talking to industry partners here, we have to look at whole of nation, right? Like World War II. It's not just the defense primes. I mean, if we just depend on them, we'll go bankrupt, right? Because if they were really successful, they'd be in the commercial market, and they're not. So we really need to look beyond the defense primes, and really this needs to be a whole of government, the whole of commercial. This is like World War II if we're going to get it right.
It's whole of government. It's multi-dimensional challenge that I think what General Flynn talked about. We did this to ourselves over time.
That's right.
Post Cold War. Okay, we need to address the effects that we suffered in our industrial base. Everybody talked about that, and that's going to take time, and that's going to take money. This isn't a new problem. Over the last decade or so, there have been multiple defense industrial base studies.
That's right.
Done by the Department of Defense back then, done by Acquisition Sustainment. And, if you look at the problem, and it's no surprise, right, when you are bringing down your force structure and companies are forced to make decisions to be more efficient so they can be profitable, they wind up outsourcing a number of, manufacturing parts and things like that to be profitable. We need to identify those. It's back to simple wargaming, right? If we need to get on a wartime footing like everybody talks about, then the companies have to come forward, defense primes, and then they have to take a really good internal look at themselves and say, what would it take to start a second line, a second and third shift with the capacity that we have? And that's a people issue, that's a material issue. Some of the parts in some of our most exquisite missile systems are manufactured not in the United States. Do we know what that is, and what does it take to bring that back home to the US? That needs to be identified now and started now. And it's not the primes, like Ed said. Much of if you look at information advantage, and you look at, or decision advantage, and some of those, where the success will rely on is those dual-use technologies. If you look at critical technology areas, think about AI, think about quantum, think about all those things where defense isn't necessarily driving the industry. We were back that way, post-Cold War when, I was with PMS 400, and we switched over to COTS, commercial off-the-shelf computers. We had these big Yuck 43 computers in our ships, and we went to Hewlett-Packard. We went to a number of systems. And then, I said, when I was in charge of that, I go, hey, Microsoft, IBM, all those folks, I need you to maintain my 286 for 30 years, the life of the ship. And they kind of laughed their ass off. They said, no, that's not profitable to us. Change out and upgrade your computer systems. It's the same now where the government, Department of War, has to look at this critical, and they're critical technology areas. Most of them are dual use. So we have the best industry in the US, the companies we have, so they need to partner with our advantage, invest in it in military use cases. Otherwise, it's going to be too late. And we're not going to get user pack fleet technology innovation in time so they're comfortable with it. And they can't train, you don't have the man train and equip, and you don't have all that stuff. Now let me shift focus now back to, that's industry, okay? Now from the warfighter standpoint, just like General Flynn said, gotta keep talking about General Flynn, this is just ridiculous. But we have to get away from, Navy is getting away from just-in-time logistics, that's ridiculous. But that's not easy, because think about the systems we're building, right? Aegis ships. You know how much spare parts cost on an Aegis ship right now? A missile defense ship. It's incredible. So I remember the time when we were in Pac Fleet, and we have missile defense warships on station, and I'm asking the question, how come it has parts challenges? And the briefing I got was to achieve an acceptable ACE of O, operational availability, you'd have to have essentially a redundant spare computer on your ship. And I don't think it's any different in the new technology we have in all our services. So what are we going to fund? All right, how are we going to maintain these systems? How are we going to replace them forward in a contested environment? That's contested logistics. That's the fight that our forward forces have to work with, because our systems aren't getting any cheaper. And to maintain appropriate ACE of O during a fight when you need it, that's another critical part that we have to address.
And so the real issue here, going back to what General Flynn said, is contested logistics is really about decisioning, it's about decision intelligence, and it's about command and control and protection, right? It's those three critical functions that enable you, right? And so when we talk about the regional sustainment framework, it's really kind of geared towards MRO, but it really needs to start looking towards what some of these great folks like IBM and others bring in terms of decision intelligence, capabilities, AI and other things, and we'll get to that in a minute. So I think, we need to begin to think about moving beyond MRO. If you think about Link 16, and how it enabled us to go between our allies and partners, that helps everybody get better in the decision intelligence and being more agile in their ability to have better decisions faster. So I think that's very good. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, please. Can you get to the next slide? Can I? Next slide, please. There we go. So, I have to say, are we solving the wrong problem, though? So, when you kind of think about it. So, hey, Pete, when you look at the Indo-Pacific challenge, you've talked a little bit about some of the vulnerabilities. Where do you see the greatest vulnerabilities? You've talked about some of them, but just give us a recap there.
Sure thing. The Indo-Pacific, you think about the Indo-Pacific outside of geopolitical, diplomatic sort of problems, there's a time distance, factor that, needs to be taken under consideration. So forward positioning of that, training activity sets that you can repurpose, defense industrial based complex forward capability. I know a lot of companies out there are leaning into this with their allies and partners. I go back to there should be no surprises. COVID was a great example. When our national strategic stockpile was was swept away in 48 hours, right? And we had to depend on supply. I do believe there's an absolute connection to the Alaska Fever operations as well as the West Coast. You look at power projection. But I go back to, the international date line, I mean, was pretty critical. Is there enough strategic lift to close combat power pacing center that the commander wants? At a way he wants to influence the operational fight? Well, the answer is no. So the commercial industry, how can we all together collectively? And that's why I love these forums. Right? We have the benchmark for water. So intellectually curious minds to think about how we can, as a whole society, solve this problem.
Okay, so Ronnie, are we focusing too heavily on the tactical systems and not enough on the industrial and operational resilience? I mean, you're looking at future capabilities. We tend to think back. A lot of times we're looking at the radars and we're looking at the interceptors and things like that. The top 25, according to our chief warrant officers and things like that, is really what's breaking us, and the supply chains to get them there, and the fragility of the supply chains. What are they telling you in the future capabilities that you really need to look at from an Army air and missile defense? And how can we address that in your future capability? Over.
It's a huge distribution fight. That's going to be the challenge, right? So we have two problems to solve. One is having what we need to distribute, but the other is knowing where it is, where it needs to be, and the optimum way to get it there. And a lot of that structure is coming into fruition right now with experimentation in the 4th Infantry Division, where a requirement can be communicated back to a support organization, and in the next generation C2, advanced or artificial intelligence and machine learning can look across the totality of information in the operations center and say, this is where the enemy is, these are the routes that are available, this is where the piece is, and this is where the distribution assets are available, and it will help us make the optimum decision on how to distribute it. But I think the bigger, so that's where my space is right now, is I'm focused on core and forward in the Sustainment Future Capability Directorate. But the other piece of this is we have to have magazine depth of mass amounts of affordable effectors. And that is absolutely on the mind of all of our Army senior leaders and even up to the secretary level. He talks about it all the time. The things, we need to invest in a lot of producible, cheap things that kill our enemy. And then we have to make deliberate decisions about the few things that are exquisite and very expensive. So we have to strike that balance. And then my previous job, having commanded in the organic industrial base, where I think, while I'm focused on forward, the thing that sticks in the back of my mind is our homeland infrastructure, our ability to protect our access to fresh water, to sewage, to energy, to communications, the internet, and banking. All of those things that Pete has to struggle with every day, those are kind of the things that I lose a little bit of sleep over at night, because if we read everything about the Chinese doctrine and their preferred method, is they would prefer not to go to a shooting war with the United States. Right. And how do they do that other than eroding our will at the national level and disrupting and disaggregating our ability to either generate or project power? So.
No, great. Vic, you were going to say.
Yeah, those just some great compelling points that were just made by the two generals. I can tell you this is where industry can help. You know, and what I'm thinking of is quantum, and quantum compute and quantum optimization. One of the use cases that we've been working with was Exxon, right? 500 liquid natural gas carriers trying to distribute, you know, LNG globally, having to deal with weather, typhoons, things like that. A very tough optimization problem, which is tailor-made for quantum. Okay, so recently there was some other articles talked about convoy routing, right, using Talisman Sabre. How is that, you know, and a problem, you know, I think, I remember my Talisman Sabre days, you know, now they're using quantum to solve convoy routing challenges. So incredible. There's also cases of strategic airlift, and even in, you know, counter UAS. These are some problems. Not everything needs to be solved by quantum. Some could be high-speed compute, but orchestrating that for the warfighter to help those really tough decisions to optimize resources in a contested logistics environment. We need to solve that problem first and foremost, because I tell you, the Chinese are spending a lot of money on this, on quantum, and trying to get ahead and beat us to the punch. And last thing on the, you know, magazine depth, you know, as I know the Navy is looking at it, because, you know, trying to rearm at sea is really a challenge. So the degree that you can transition to directed energy for the majority of your defense, you still need the hard kill systems, but many of those cells can transition to offensive weapons. So there's a balance as you look at, as capabilities get developed, how you can ease some of those logistics challenges using technology like directed energy.
Next slide, please.
Can I just comment quickly?
Did you have something, Pete or Ronnie?
General Dorman?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead. Was that Pete? Did you have something, or was that Ronnie?
Yeah, sir. Yeah, I just wanted to quickly comment. You know, I was forward in Tel Aviv, Israel, during the 12-day war, and saw Midnight Hammer unfold. And if you go back to your last chart, you know, there is extreme confidence in our military, our joint forces to move exquisite, you know, sort of munitions, get the capability to where it needs to go, all the things on this chart here. But at the end of the day, you know, I've got to go back to power of resiliency. The sergeant and the private, you know, that are fixing power generation, repatriating that's really what won the 12-day war, right? It's not the B-52 or the B-2 bombers. It's the shore power requirements in the Indo-Pacific. You pick the COCOM are not we can't trust just because of the sensitive nature of all the equipment you see on this chart. You know, many times it was the 1987, 1990, you know, 150K EPP generator that we were all concerned about, or the cables that were not the Talon, or not the THAAD, not the Patriot Interceptor, not the launcher, not the TPY-2. It was the power source, and we had a lot of work to do on that end, specifically in a contested, ambiguous, distributed, you know, sort of Lisco fight over.
No, that's a great piece that you pick up on. So we've been focused on the technology, Pete, and here's something from Epic Fury that I picked up on from both my Israeli colleagues and some of my Emirati and some colleagues in Bahrain and other places across the GCC. So it's about relationships too, right? So at one time, we had an air defense soldier sitting with each of our partners in their command and control facilities, and we took all of those soldiers out. That's not partnership, that's not burden sharing, that's not being a true partner, right? Our expertise is first rate. As General Flynn said, we always come back to that. It's our training and our technical expertise, which is the best in the world, bar none. And when they sit in those command and control centers and they advise our allies and partners, they do better with their systems when they intercept. That's just the bottom line. And we took those soldiers out, and that made a huge difference. That meant our bases got struck, their bases got struck, and destruction happened, right? We've got to stop doing that. It goes back to the cables, it goes back to the generators, it goes back to other things besides the things that we think are most important, the erector launchers, the command and control centers. It goes back to just the circuit card repair, the quick understanding and nuances, right? We work best when we work as partners and allies in a team, right? And we have to do better. We are not an expeditionary force. We haven't been an expeditionary force in probably 30 to 40 years. We cannot go and be one with the environment. Now, DARPA is doing some great things. No one listens to them, with directed energy. They don't. I've been to DARPA and said, hey, you got some great PhD programs there that said we have some energetics on site in the environment. We can go. There's this belief in the United States that because I can projectile someplace in an airplane and get to the environment, that I'm expeditionary. But being able to get there by some conveyance does not mean that I become one with the environment, that I can sustain myself when I'm there. That's not an expeditionary force. An expeditionary force means I go there and I can operate there if I become untethered. That's what we need to become again. We need to be able to, and Taiwan is a first world country. General Flynn's been there, I've been there. It is a first world country. It has facilities and capabilities that we ought to be able to leverage, from manufacturing to logistics and other things. But we're not able to do that. And those are things we have to do. So I'll get off my soapbox, but I'm kind of passionate about it from a logistics standpoint, because it's that capability when we operate together that will allow us to get into what we're talking about and what Pete's talking about here. So I would go ahead and move. Anything else on this, Pete or Ronnie or Vic, just when we kind of talk about this? Okay. Next slide, please. Let's get to decision advantage, because I think this is really important in a contested environment when you want to say. So we hear many technology terms today, artificial intelligence. I just taught a class last week at Duke on this. We throw AI around like a noun, right? And we use it like that. The SecDef has told us use GenAI.mil. It's on our machines, but we don't know the difference between an LLM, an LQM, an agent, or anything else, because we don't invest the time and the effort into using the right tool for the right outcome, use case, etc. So digital twins, overused term, edge computing, we need to talk about that. We need to invest in predictive analytics. The question is not whether these technologies are interesting. The question is whether they improve decisions. They do. Ronnie, I've heard you talk a lot about predictive analytics. They're very important. How do we move from understanding what failed yesterday to predicting what will fail tomorrow? You've done a lot of work on this in the Future Capabilities Directorate. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing and where we're going, especially when it comes to air and missile defense?
I don't have a great air and missile defense example that we've proven right now, but I can tell you, in this environment, I'll tell you that we're working on something. But let me give you an example of how we got after this last year at Project Convergence. On an M1A2 Set V3, we spent some money to have the engineers build a software update to the onboard computer of an M1A2 Set V3 that monitors the conditions of that tank already. So we were able to monitor how much ammunition by type was in the tank, how much fuel was in the tank and the rate at which it was burning, and we were able to narrow it down to 55 critical maintenance faults on the tank. They developed one wire and connected it to the onboard computer to the JVCP, communicated that in real time with a refresh rate. We tried to break the system, and we got down to every second, and it could still do it. But we could monitor that tank's health and condition in real time through JVCP and beam it right back down to a command post, and that was enabling sustainer decisions and maneuver commander decisions based on the health of that tank. And the system was able to actually, while they were maneuvering, going towards the live fire event at the National Training Center, an indicator of a problem that was going to happen on that tank was transmitted back up through the system to both the maneuver commander and the sustainment commander, and they were able to make decisions about what that tank's role was going to be in the next operation, which sustainment element was going to move the right person with the right part to move to that tank and get after it. So many of our combat platforms have that capability. But when it comes to trade space, we are trading it away and not investing in the ability to monitor our combat platforms while they are maneuvering. We also have to invest in much more metadata off of those platforms when they are at the hull. And the reason I say that is because while you are maneuvering, you don't want these huge bits of information clogging up your command and control network. But when you get into a patrol base, or when you get back to an assembly area or into a hasty defense, you can transmit that data on a much larger pipe so that we can see all kinds of information about that piece of equipment, from transmission temperatures over time, engine transmissions or temperatures over time. And the 1st Armored Division is doing that right now with their head fleet. So now we need to take all of these technologies, make sure that they're affordable at scale, get the right pipelines in place, and we already have much of the capability and the algorithm set. And that's how we will be able to do this, especially for our most critical components. I'm not advocating that we have to do this for every single piece of equipment in the Army. But those pieces of equipment that are absolutely essential, like all of our air defense systems, we're in our missile launching systems, those we are absolutely going to have to outfit. Over.
Great, thanks. And Pete, what information, for air missile defense and must remain available at the tactical edge when, say connectivity is degraded for you to have decision advantage? And what would you tell industry is most important? What can they do for you?
That's a great question. To answer your first question, what can we do now? We need to continue to be intellectually curious. We need to continue to experiment with, what all these applications that are out there. There's thousands of different applications. It's almost too much. For instance, we used the joint sustainment decision tool for elite constellation. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Next Gen C2, I think what Major General Pat Ellis is doing out of the 4th Infantry Division right now is taking the land component to the next level here, and I think that's all good. As it relates to space and missile defense, I think Golden Dome is giving us a peek behind the curtain in terms of what the real power of quantum computing and agentic AI and machine learning can do. But if you look at it from really at the core division, kind of the below levels, you're exactly right. I think there's not a lot of folks understand, soldiers understand the true definition of people are using AI like in every other sentence, and it doesn't make sense. We don't have a true understanding or appreciation for what it can do. Now, we are using it extensively to look at face maintenance for our rotary wing fleets. I think what General Mohan AMCOM are doing is absolutely next level. It is providing a realistic, predictive, transparent nature. In some cases, we don't like the answers, but in the backdrop, what the industry can help us out with is we have to steer away from software development bias. We have to steer away from algorithmic, sort of bias that's built in. We have to understand tech policy to ensure that we can, we all can understand, lean into the defense requirements and not be afraid to share and partner with the development of intellectual properties. And I think we're starting to see a little breakthrough on this right now. But again, I go back to it's not the exquisite kit, it's not the exquisite munitions, it's everything else designed to achieve the effects on the battlefield for the commander.
Great, thanks, Pete. Vic, just how do we avoid creating new dependencies while pursuing these decisions?
Yeah, let me first put on my Navy hat. Full disclosure, this started as a Navy-centric initiative. General Flynn and the Army G6 has actually expressed interest in it because we've talked about data, we've talked about quantum and high-speed computing. What we know is it's very data center intensive and it's very power intensive. So what is that architecture, the distributed architecture from CONUS, where we saw, look at the Red Sea operations when we were able to cipher off and monitor the performance of our missile systems, feed them back, assess them, send them back to the ship, give them instructions, develop new TPPs so they're more effective, in the fight. Fast forward that to the Pacific, it's going to be exponentially harder. So what is the architecture that you need? You're looking at that from a Navy standpoint, now Joint Force, from the shore CONUS to a 4-star JTF headquarters. We talked about the tactical edge, to the carrier strike group, Blue Ridge, the command ship, all the way down to the individual units. What type of power requirements, data storage requirements, if they're cut off, all of the above to be able to function, from a deterrence posture where it's manageable to where it's completely denied. Okay, so some thought needs to be given that with industry based on how the Joint Force is fighting and develop that strategy to start outfitting a force, which will enable decision advantage, which will leverage, give you the building blocks, the data readiness to use AI, all of the above, to really take our force to the next level. So that is kind of the thinking that needs to happen now. We're doing it. That's where I am in my company, IBM, and we're working together with Navy. And like I said, the G6 is also, because of some events that happen, are interested in kind of that thought piece to try to develop that further.
Awesome. So I think we probably need to look a little bit. We've talked a lot about air missile and some integrated air missile and some other things and logistics, but we also probably need to escape into space, something we don't really talk about when we talk about logistics. So next slide, please. So looking beyond, right? Beyond traditional logistics, right? So, there's some emerging domains. There's low Earth orbit, there's space domains. People haven't thought about that for a while. I know in the community I spent a lot of time in special operations. We're now looking at it, especially low Earth orbit, things that you can call on for, quick deliver packages, very similar to, think about the Joint Precision Airdrop capability. But if we don't begin to test that, right, it will have an escalatory effect because the Chinese will see that being launched and they might think it's a hypersonic. And that's not, out of the realm of the possible. And we're not exercising that. We also don't have the infrastructure. We only have 2 places, Cape Canaveral and Boca Chica down in the Keys, right? So we need to start getting that proliferated out across the Indo-Pacific, right? And that takes time and investment, right? And so we need to exercise it, we need to get it out there. So it's non-traditional. And that is a way of delivering, medical capability. It is, but we also need to get the canisters out there and get those cachet, right? That's another thing well in advance, left during competition, that we need to get out there. And then we need to start using it. And you can call for it quickly and then, develop those capabilities. It's about packaging, right? It's like pre-positioned stocks. It's just a different way of thinking about it. But it's going to take some logistics behind it. It's going to take technology behind it. It's going to take edge computing. It's going to take predictive analytics. It's affected by weather. So all of the things that we have talked about today affect this kind of capability. Later on, it will be further into space. It's expensive, but the more we work it, the more we use it, it'll bring down the cost of it. So let's go ahead and look at a little bit. So emerging cyber information space, there's the traditional you've seen there. So we just need to think about space mobility and so forth. So next slide, please. Let's go into the closing round. Let's just kind of open it up. I'll go to Ronnie, 30 seconds each. Ronnie, talk to us the thing that keeps you up at night, that you want industry to know, that you want to leave them with.
Sir, thanks. As we wrap up, I want to thank you, Dr. Fitzgerald, and NDIA for having us here, and all the folks there at Huntsville. Absolutely loved my time there and hope to get back there. For industry partners, I really would ask that we work on finding a common ground between industry and the government on how we get access to our repair parts so that we can keep the equipment that we have and the equipment that we have entering the force viable. We've got into a part where you guys discussed it, where we've subcontracted all those parts. Now that manufacturing has gone away, the primes aren't interested in doing it, but they're not interested in giving us access to it. So I would ask industry to be thinking about, entering that supply chain and going after those things that are obsolescent now or going to be obsolete, and go after getting those things and bring those back into the supply chain on our home soil to help us. And we also need to desperately invest in onshoring the critical components of our manufacturing. Manufacturing itself, but also the critical components that go into those systems. Sir, thank you and the team for allowing me to share today.
Thanks, Ronnie. Appreciate it. Pete, over to you, Western Hemisphere and beyond.
Yes, sir. Thanks again for your leadership, sir. Thanks for the opportunity. I want to double back on General Flynn and General Mohan. Gentlemen, thank you for everything, really, in terms of what you're doing. My message to industry is logistics wins wars. It's very simple at the end of the day, and we have to get out of the incentivizing, kind of like production and revenue. Your return on investment is national security at the end of the day, right? So I think we have to be okay with spending a little extra money, buying down risk, national. I'm just going to leave it at that. I really appreciate the opportunity, General Dorman, sir, and Vic, it's great to see you again. And we have a lot of work to do here. I think we need to keep our sleeves rolled up. Thank you.
Thank you. Vic?
Yeah, quickly, I go back. If you can but address the contested logistics challenge, that is the most difficult and comprehensive challenge. If you go to J4, they're actually looking at contested logistics mission areas. So, it's all of the above. It's not just logistics, it's utilizing, you're going to be given resources in all domains to assure your logistics chain and interrupt and interdict the adversaries. That's the mission. Okay, it's not just strike ops, it's not just air superiority, maritime superiority. Contested logistics is the enable for all of that in every domain which will be contested. So if you can solve that, and back what I said, the key to solving that is not only what the defense primes are doing as an industry representative, the information technology industry, the AI industry, those are the ones that need to kind of step up and partner with the Department of War to start getting at the use cases. We need those use cases so that we can work together to find solutions. All of industry need that. And I think, having been a budget guy, usually, the dual-use technology, that's the last thing you want to spend your money on, because, industry, we're at the advantage. We have the advantage. So at the just-in-time, industry will come in and save the day. Be careful. It'll be much more expensive then, and the risk will be through the roof. So need to lead the target, work closely with non-traditional primes to get at those challenging problems and missions.
Okay, next slide, please. I think you've seen this. Check on learning. Which matters more? Next. Both. Why? Logistics is deterrence. So what I would leave you with is, it's not about contested logistics. My grandmother has contested logistics. Most mornings. Okay? It's about resilience. Okay? It's about national resilience. If you remember nothing else, it's about resilience. It's about joint, interagency, multinational, commercial. Why is it about that? Because it's whole of partners and allies resilience, right? And so that means industry has to come to a table in a way it's never had today, right? And if you think, well, that's going to cost me money. Well, that's going to do this. Well, the alternative is your long-term sustainability as a company, right? Because you won't have a company, or your profit, your P&L won't be the same as it's been before. So you got to think about that. So if you want to put some predictive analytics towards it, right, the alternative is not a good one, right? Because the protractive stage of the war is ongoing now. And so our ability to have credible deterrence is in our ability to mitigate the effects of what they are doing in the competition space, right? And that's through positional advantage of building up our ability to be credible in our sustainment warfighting function. And the sustainment warfighting function, in case no one remembers, is the logistics functions and its sub-functions. And then the rest of the sustainment is medical, right? Legal, financial, right? And human resources. And it's all of those combined which make us robust, right? Make us the greatest country on earth, right? So we've applied it to the air and missile defense, the space and missile defense working group here, because that's critical. That's really what the Army brings to the Indo-Pacific, among other things, but especially in phase 0 and phase 1, where it is that will provide that incredible deterrence. So it's been my great privilege to be here with you today, with great friends. So thank you for listening to us, and thanks to my panelists, and thanks to each of you. Appreciate it.
I want to thank our panelists. Before you leave, I've got a gift for you.
Pocket protector. I love it. Thank you.
Got mine.
I got mine.
Well, much smarter.
Awesome. Thank you. I guess it's a bridge. I've been there.
Exactly.
Thank you
Made
so
the
much.
jump. Let's give it up for our panel.
Made the jump.
This has been a success, folks. I've been so pleased with the outcome.
Is that good?
And I hope everyone learned a great deal. I know I did, and I was very excited about it. But that being said, we are going to have our next meeting of the working group on 23 July. Terry Grisham, U.S. Space Command. Location will be TBD. It's TBD at this point. Of course, we have the Space Missile Defense Symposium coming up on 10 to 13 August. I want us to thank our hosts. I want to thank our guest speakers and panelists. General Flynn, it's marvelous and fantastic to see you. You're a great American, sir. Appreciate all you do for our nation. General Mohan, thank you so very much for being with us. And he was with us all day long from 4:30 this morning. And it's only a half a day, remember, this is the morning, you got the whole afternoon. That's what you do.
Lunch, Joe.
If I stay 5 minutes more this week, it's 5 minutes more, I'm buying lunch.
Full reserve.
Thanks to the work group leadership and volunteers, Joe Pascal, John Carver, and Bob English, thank you so much. University of Alabama, thank you for the facility. IBM, thank you for the program support. We appreciate everyone being with us today, this morning. Again, go to work, and you still got the rest of the day to accomplish great things. Thank you all for coming.